Revenge is not a public shouting match. It is a carefully reconciled balance sheet, evening the scales of justice one line item at a time. I am sitting in the driver's seat of my sedan, letting the biting Alabama winter air chill the glass. My fingers run over the raised seal of a freshly printed property deed resting on the dashboard. Through the windshield, I watch a private catering team carry heavy silver chafing dishes through the front doors of an opulent Huntsville estate. The towering brick columns and manicured lawns radiate generational Southern wealth. It is Christmas night. My pulse is steady. My name is Vivian Shaw. I am 32 years old. Exactly 1 year ago, I sat trapped inside that very same house, suffocating in the orchestrated warmth of my mother-in-law's dining room. I watched Martha Pierce glide around a sprawling mahogany table, serving generous cuts of prime rib to every single guest. When she reached my chair, she stopped. She lowered her silver serving tray, revealing a deliberate void where the final portion should have been. With a sweet, calculated smile, she announced to the silent room that there just was not enough food for me. My husband Nathan stared at his lap, chewing a piece of dinner roll, refusing to look at his starving wife. They thought they had cornered a fragile outsider. They did not realize they had just triggered an audit from a federal aerospace supply chain investigator. What happened next made Martha drop her crystal goblet, made Nathan turn the color of wet ash, and made the entire extended family understand why you never serve an empty plate to a woman who tracks disappearing assets for a living. Before I tell you the rest of this story, please take a moment to hit the like button and subscribe to Emily Told Stories. I would also love to know your age and what city you are listening from in the comments below. The air inside the Pierce family dining room felt thick with the scent of roasted garlic and Martha's suffocating floral perfume. I sat rigid in a high-backed chair, gripping a linen napkin in my lap. To my left, an oversized smart TV mounted on the far wall looped a digital, crackling Yule log, casting an artificial amber glow across the faces of my in-laws. Abigail, my husband's sister, sat across from me, tapping her manicured nails against the wood, waiting for the evening entertainment to begin. Nathan stood near my shoulder, holding a bottle of bold Cabernet. He was a regional manager for a major automotive manufacturing plant in the valley, a man who prided himself on control and precision. But as he tilted the bottle to fill my glass, my eyes caught a subtle, rapid tremor in his wrist. A single dark drop of wine splashed onto the pristine white tablecloth, blooming like a fresh bruise. He inhaled sharply, masking the mistake by clearing his throat. My training at the Defense Contract Audit Agency taught me to spot anomalies. A tremor in a confident man meant hidden variables. It meant fear. Martha commanded the room with the effortless superiority of a woman who chaired 3 different local charity boards. She wore a tailored emerald blouse that cost more than my first car. She wielded her silver serving tray like a weapon, dispensing favor along with the food. She heaped buttery sides and thick slices of meat onto the plates of cousins, aunts, and uncles, smiling warmly as they praised her hospitality. The rhythmic clinking of heavy silverware filled the room, a comfortable soundtrack of Southern elite indulgence. Then she reached my corner of the table. The rhythmic clinking stopped. The ambient chatter died away, replaced by a heavy, expectant silence. Abigail stopped tapping her nails. Martha lowered the tray, hovering it just inches above my empty porcelain plate. The silver surface caught the ambient light, highlighting the pool of meat juices and stray peppercorns where a serving should have been. She leaned down, her face hovering uncomfortably close to mine. "Oh, bless your heart," Martha drawled, her voice ringing with counterfeit sympathy. "There just was not enough for you, Vivian. You do not mind, do you?" The question hung in the stagnant air. It was a trap, layered in Southern etiquette. If I complained, I became the ungrateful, dramatic daughter-in-law ruining Christmas. If I accepted it, I cemented my status as a subservient secondary citizen in her empire. I shifted my gaze toward Nathan. I needed my partner to stand up, to slide his plate over, to speak a single word of defense. Nathan kept his eyes glued to the center of his own overflowing plate. His jaw worked mechanically, chewing a piece of bread he had not even buttered. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing in the amber light, but no sound came out. He was choosing the path of least resistance, leaving me alone on the front lines. I did not cry. I did not storm out of the room to weep in the guest bathroom. In the aerospace sector, when an auditor encounters a glaring discrepancy, we do not panic. We isolate the data point, trace the origin, and build a case. I looked back at Martha, studying the triumphant gleam in her eyes. This was not a culinary miscalculation. It was a localized perimeter breach. A social eviction notice drafted by a mother and silently authorized by a son. I smiled. It was a thin, cold expression that did not reach my eyes. "Not at all, Martha," I said, my tone perfectly even, devoid of the emotional reaction she was trying to extract. "I have had plenty." I reached out and pushed my pristine, empty plate 2 inches toward the center of the table. The scrape of porcelain against the polished mahogany sounded loud in the quiet room. I folded my linen napkin, placed it neatly beside the empty dish, and crossed my hands in my lap. I leaned back into my chair, projecting unbothered calm. Martha blinked, her triumphant smile faltering for a fraction of a second. She had expected tears. She had expected a frantic, hasty retreat. My calm acceptance robbed her of the spectacle she had orchestrated for her guests. She stiffened, lifting the empty tray, and marched back toward the kitchen, her heels striking the hardwood floor a little too hard. The low hum of conversation slowly resumed around the table, as cousins and aunts pretended nothing had happened. I sat in silence, analyzing the shift in the room's atmosphere. The air felt brittle. Nathan reached for his wine glass, his hand still harboring that subtle, nervous tremor. He took a long, desperate swallow, avoiding my eyes entirely. He thought I was suppressing my hurt. He thought I was playing the role of the compliant, dutiful wife, swallowing my pride to keep the peace. He was catastrophically mistaken. Sitting at that lavish table, listening to the sounds of a family feasting, while I sat with nothing, I felt a profound, clarifying shift in my chest. The woman who had tried for 3 years to earn Martha Pierce's approval vanished. In her place, an intelligence gatherer emerged. If my husband was willing to let his mother starve me out of the family hierarchy in public, I needed to know what he was doing to me in private. The tremor in his hand, the sudden secretive phone calls he had been taking in the garage, the late nights at the automotive plant, all the disjointed data points began connecting in my mind. The Pierces believed they held all the leverage because they controlled the social narrative in Huntsville. They operated under the delusion that their country club status made them untouchable. I watched Nathan slice his prime rib, noting the precise angle of his knife. They had no idea I was about to turn their perfect, wealthy lives into a forensic crime scene. I was going to pull their financial records, map their hidden vulnerabilities, and dismantle their empire one line item at a time. And I was going to start with the man sitting right next to me. The drive back to our property in the Appalachian foothills stretched into a suffocating quiet. The winding 2-lane road cut through dense stands of loblolly pines and bare winter oaks. Frost edged the windshield, reflecting the harsh glare of oncoming headlights. Inside the cabin, the heater hummed at full capacity, but the air felt brittle. Nathan kept both hands locked onto the steering wheel. His knuckles were bone white. He stared straight ahead, refusing to acknowledge my presence in the passenger seat. The silence was not the comfortable quiet of a shared life. It was a barricade. He was waiting for me to breach it. I let the miles roll by, studying his profile in the dashboard lights. The subtle tremor I had noticed while he poured the wine remained. His jaw worked in tight, rhythmic clenches. When we finally turned onto our gravel driveway, the tires crunching loudly against the stones, I decided to test the perimeter. "Your mother made a deliberate choice tonight," I said, my voice low and even. Nathan threw the car into park, cutting the engine with a sharp twist of the key. He did not look at me. He erupted. "Why do you always do this?" he snapped, his voice echoing in the confined space. "Why do you have to play the victim every single time we see my family?" "She miscounted the plates, Vivian. She was hosting 20 people and she made a simple arithmetic mistake." But instead of acting like a gracious guest, you sat there like a martyr and humiliated me in front of everyone. I watched him breathe. His chest heaved. He was projecting indignation, but the pitch of his voice betrayed an underlying panic. "She did not miscount," I replied, maintaining a calm, steady cadence. She looked directly into my eyes and told me there was not enough for me. "You are too sensitive," Nathan shot back, finally turning to glare at me. His face was flushed. "You read malice into everything my mother does because you feel inferior to her. You made the entire evening uncomfortable. My sister noticed it. My cousins noticed it. You ruined Christmas because you could not handle a minor oversight. You owe her an apology. You owe me an apology." The sheer audacity of his narrative twist was a masterclass in manipulation. He was actively rewriting reality, hoping to make me doubt my own sanity. He wanted me to cry. He wanted me to defend myself, to raise my voice to match his manufactured outrage. If I became hysterical, he could dismiss my valid observations as the ramblings of an unstable wife. Sitting in the cold darkness of the driveway, my mind slipped away from the toxic confines of my marriage. I transported myself back 3 years to a sterile, windowless classroom at the Defense Contract Audit Agency training facility in Virginia. Instructor Mitchell, a man who had spent 3 decades untangling international defense fraud, stood before a whiteboard covered in complex forensic algorithms. He possessed the coldest, most analytical gaze I had ever encountered. He looked at our cohort of fresh aerospace auditors and delivered a lecture that would become the foundation of my entire professional existence. "Fraudsters weaponize emotion," Mitchell had told us, tapping a marker against the board. "When you uncover an anomaly, the subject will rarely admit fault. They will attack your character. They will cry. They will scream. They will accuse you of persecution. They do this to create a smokescreen. They want you to become angry or defensive, because an emotional auditor is a distracted auditor. When the subject escalates the tension, you must do the opposite. Never react emotionally to the anomaly. Just audit the data." I pulled myself back to the present moment. I looked at Nathan. The man gripping the steering wheel was no longer my partner. He was a hostile asset. His gaslighting, his frantic need to frame me as the aggressor, his refusal to defend me at the dinner table. These were not just the actions of a terrible husband. They were the actions of a man generating a dense emotional smokescreen to hide a severe anomaly. To find the hidden data, I needed the subject to feel secure. I needed him to believe his smokescreen had worked. I lowered my gaze, staring at my hands resting in my lap. I let my shoulders slump, adopting the posture of a woman worn down by her own supposed neuroses. I forced my voice to soften, shedding the crisp articulation of an investigator and adopting the hesitant tone of a compliant spouse. "You might be right," I whispered, projecting a vulnerability I did not feel. I was just so caught off guard. Maybe I let my insecurities cloud my judgment. The holidays are stressful, and I should not have reacted that way. I will reflect on my behavior tonight. I will call your mother tomorrow and try to make things right. The transformation in Nathan was instantaneous. The rigid tension in his neck evaporated. He let out a long, heavy sigh, leaning back against the headrest. The panic in his eyes receded, replaced by a smug, paternalistic satisfaction. He had neutralized the threat. He had successfully subjugated his wife. "I appreciate you saying that, Vivian," he said, his tone shifting to a patronizing murmur. "It takes a big person to admit when they are wrong. Let us just get some sleep and start fresh in the morning." We walked into the house together, playing our respective roles. We brushed our teeth in silence. We climbed into bed, and Nathan fell asleep within 10 minutes, his breathing deep and even. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, mapping out my tactical response. The next morning, the Alabama sun rose over the foothills, casting long shadows across the frost-covered lawn. Nathan woke up early, dressed in his crisp manager attire, and kissed my cheek before heading to his truck. He told me to have a relaxing day off. He drove down the gravel path heading toward the automotive manufacturing plant, believing his home was secure. The moment his taillights vanished around the bend, I went to work. I brewed a pot of black coffee and carried it into my home office. I closed the door and booted up my encrypted work laptop. Before accessing any personal information, I routed my connection through a secure virtual private network and engaged a secondary firewall. If Nathan had installed any basic tracking software on our home router, I needed my digital footprint to remain entirely invisible. My instincts screamed that the dinner incident was connected to our finances. Nathan had been fiercely protective of the mail for the past 2 months. He had changed the password to our joint online banking portal, claiming it was a routine security update. I bypassed his new password in less than 3 minutes using a backdoor recovery protocol tied to our joint tax filing credentials. The portal loaded, displaying our checking, savings, and investment portfolios. I clicked on the primary savings account. This was the account where we pooled our discretionary income, the money slated for our future children and emergency repairs. The screen refreshed. I stared at the ledger. My breath caught in my throat. I did not move. I did not blink. I just stared at the stark black numbers on the high-definition screen. The balance was virtually zero. I pulled the transaction history, filtering the data to isolate the anomaly. There it was. An outgoing wire transfer executed just 48 hours prior. The sum was staggering. $40,000 had been drained from our liquid assets in a single keystroke. The pieces of the puzzle slammed together with sickening clarity. Martha Pierce had not denied me a plate of food out of petty high society spite. She had orchestrated a visceral, humiliating public spectacle to derail me emotionally. She wanted me furious. She wanted me obsessed with her cruelty. Nathan had gaslighted me in the car to keep me focused on my own supposed flaws and the drama of the country club hierarchy. They had colluded to create a dazzling, blinding distraction. They wanted me fighting a ghost while they emptied the vault. The Christmas dinner insult was nothing but a tactical diversion masking a profound betrayal. I saved the banking ledger to a secure, encrypted drive, closing the browser window. My husband thought he had stolen my future and bought my silence. He did not realize he had just handed a loaded weapon to a woman who knew exactly how to pull the trigger. The numbers on the high-definition monitor stared back at me, glowing with a cold, undeniable truth. $40,000 had evaporated from our primary savings. In the civilian world, an electronic wire transfer might seem like a ghost disappearing into a maze of banking institutions. But in the federal aerospace sector, we know that money always leaves a digital wake. I am trained to track multi-million-dollar discrepancies across international defense supply chains. Tracing a domestic wire transfer took me less than 4 minutes. I pulled up the transaction metadata, downloading the raw ledger files. The routing number belonged to a regional credit union headquartered just down the highway. But the destination account was cloaked behind a corporate privacy shield. I bypassed the superficial banking firewall, utilizing a routine cross-reference algorithm I often deployed to vet Tier 3 defense contractors. The destination account materialized on my screen. The funds had been deposited into Pierce Automotive Holdings, LLC. I ran the corporate entity through the Alabama Secretary of State Business Registry. The official registration document loaded in seconds. The sole managing member listed on the charter was Martha Pierce. The registered address was the sprawling Huntsville estate where I had been starved and humiliated just hours prior. My mother-in-law did not own a car dealership. She did not manufacture engine components. Her daily schedule consisted of hosting charity galas, playing tennis at the local country club, and drinking sweet tea on her veranda. The LLC was a ghost company, a hollow financial vessel created for one specific illicit purpose. I cross-referenced the date of the LLC formation with Nathan Employment's history. I remembered a dinner conversation from 3 months ago. Nathan had come home smelling of cheap scotch, his tie loosened, muttering about severe inventory shortages and logistical bottlenecks on his factory floor. He was a regional manager who prided himself on flawless production metrics. A failure on the assembly line would jeopardize his career and shatter his carefully curated image of the successful Southern executive. He was not just stealing our savings for personal enrichment. He was quietly liquidating our marital assets to cover a catastrophic deficit at his manufacturing plant. He was funneling the stolen money through his mother to launder the paper trail, keeping the theft hidden from his wife. A typical spouse might print the ledger, storm into the hallway, and demand immediate answers. They might pack a bag or threaten divorce. But a defense auditor understands that confronting an enemy prematurely simply gives them the opportunity to destroy the remaining evidence. Nathan thought I was a naive partner who only cared about keeping the peace at holiday dinners. I needed to weaponize his assumption. I closed the banking portal, cleared the cache, and wiped my search history. I walked down the quiet hallway to Nathan's home office. The room smelled of his expensive cedar cologne and stale coffee. I approached his heavy oak desk, moving with deliberate precision. I did not touch his physical files or open his locked drawers. Paper is messy and easily noticed. Instead, I reached behind his desktop tower and inserted a military-grade encrypted keystroke logging dongle into a blind USB port facing the wall. The device was smaller than a thumbnail. It would silently record every password, every email, every frantic message he typed, capturing his entire digital existence in real time. But keystrokes alone would not stand up to the scrutiny I was preparing to bring down upon him. I needed visual confirmation. I opened my specialized work bag and retrieved 2 micro-optical sensors. These tiny lenses were standard issue for securing sensitive federal briefing rooms against unauthorized surveillance. I climbed onto his desk and embedded the first sensor inside the plastic grating of the smoke detector positioned directly above his workspace. This angle provided a pristine, high-definition view of his monitor and any physical documents he reviewed. I placed the second sensor inside the hollowed spine of a thick, leather-bound dictionary resting on his top bookshelf, ensuring a wide-angle panoramic view of the entire room. I spent the next hour hardwiring the feeds to bypass our local residential internet router. I routed the encrypted data stream through a secure remote server I maintained for off-site government audits. If Nathan or Martha attempted to cover their tracks, if they initiated another wire transfer or drafted fraudulent documents, I would watch them execute the crime in pristine clarity. I sat back in my own office chair, sipping the last remnants of my cold coffee. I thought about how Nathan had always insisted on managing our household bills. He portrayed himself as a responsible, pragmatic executive, shielding his analytical wife from the tedious realities of domestic finance. It was a carefully constructed facade designed to enforce my blindness. Now the blindfold was off. My surveillance architecture was flawless. My defensive perimeter was locked. I was ready to watch him hang himself. I picked up my smartphone, intending to check my morning work emails. Instead, a push notification flashed across the locked screen. It was an alert from the Huntsville Whisper, a popular local society blog that catered to the affluent country club elite. Martha read the site religiously, using it to track the social missteps of her peers. The headline glowing on my screen caught my immediate attention. Trouble in the aerospace sector. My pulse quickened. I tapped the notification and the web page loaded. The article was an anonymous submission published just 15 minutes ago. The text was dripping with venom, masquerading as Southern concern. According to the Post, a prominent local aerospace supply chain auditor was spiraling out of control. The anonymous author claimed this woman was financially abusing her hard-working automotive executive husband. I read the words, my eyes scanning the paragraphs of pure, fabricated slander. The Post detailed wild accusations about hidden credit card debt, erratic emotional behavior at recent family gatherings, and a selfish refusal to contribute to the household estate. It painted a vivid picture of a gold-digging outsider bleeding a respected legacy family dry. The author expressed deep, profound sympathy for the husband and his devoted mother, who were reportedly trying to save the marriage while drowning in the wife-manufactured chaos. The details were far too specific to be random gossip. The mention of my exact job title, the subtle reference to erratic behavior at family gatherings, a clear weaponization of the Christmas dinner incident where I had supposedly ruined the holiday by refusing to eat. I stared at the glowing screen, the pieces of their broader strategy falling into place with terrifying precision. Nathan and Martha were not just stealing my money. They were executing a preemptive psychological strike. They knew that when the missing $40,000 eventually came to light, I would sound the alarm and scream fraud. To neutralize my credibility, they were orchestrating a public smear campaign to brand me as an unstable financial liability. By the time I attempted to expose their embezzlement, the entire Huntsville high society would already view me as a hysterical liar trying to cover up my own failures. The battlefield had just expanded beyond our joint bank accounts and the four walls of our home. They were coming for my reputation, my standing in the community, and my sanity. I locked my phone, my jaw tightening. They wanted a public war. They were about to learn what happens when you invite an auditor to inspect your life. The anonymous blog post was merely the opening salvo in a meticulously orchestrated campaign of character assassination. Within 48 hours, the poison seeped into the bedrock of Huntsville high society. Martha utilized her entrenched positions on the Botanical Garden Committee and the Country Club Advisory Board to execute a surgical strike on my reputation. In a southern city where the economy is driven by tight-knit aerospace contracts and legacy agricultural wealth, your public standing is your most valuable currency. Martha was systematically bankrupting mine. I noticed the atmospheric shift almost immediately. Text messages from casual acquaintances went unanswered. Invitations to weekend brunch engagements miraculously stopped arriving. When I navigated the aisles of the local organic grocery store, women I had known for years suddenly found the citrus displays fascinating, actively turning their shopping carts to avoid making eye contact. They were constructing an invisible quarantine around me. Martha had spent decades cultivating a network of affluent wives who relied on her for social validation. They did not question her narrative. They simply absorbed the fabricated tragedy of a devoted son drowning in the reckless credit card debt of a greedy, unstable wife. The true test of my sudden isolation arrived on a Friday evening. The Huntsville Agronomy Foundation was hosting its annual Winter Charity Gala at the Botanical Gardens. It was a mandatory appearance for anyone adjacent to the local manufacturing and aerospace sectors. Nathan claimed he had an emergency supply chain logistics meeting at the automotive plant and could not attend. I knew his absence was a calculated maneuver. He was abandoning me to walk into the lion's den alone. I dressed in a tailored charcoal gown, prioritizing armor over aesthetics. The grand ballroom hummed with the overlapping chatter of wealthy donors and local executives. Crystal chandeliers cast fractured light over silent auctions and champagne fountains. I entered the venue, keeping my posture rigid and my expression neutral. The temperature in the room seemed to drop the moment I crossed the threshold. Groups of women huddled in tight circles, their voices dropping to harsh whispers as I passed. I approached a group of former colleagues from a defense contracting firm, hoping for a shred of normalcy. As I neared their circle, the conversation abruptly died. One woman offered a tight, panicked smile before excusing herself to check on a silent auction bid. The others quickly followed suit, leaving me standing alone near a towering floral arrangement. I did not retreat to my car. I walked directly to the mahogany bar, ordering a sparkling water with a lime wedge. I kept my gaze focused on the bartender, refusing to look at the staring crowd. A heavy wave of cloying floral perfume signaled the arrival of the enemy. Martha materialized beside me. She wore a deep ruby dress, her diamonds flashing under the ambient light. She leaned her elbow against the polished wood of the bar, projecting the image of a concerned matriarch checking on her troubled daughter-in-law. "Vivian, darling," Martha murmured, her voice dripping with artificial honey. "I am surprised you decided to show your face tonight. Given everything happening at home, I assumed you would prefer to keep a low profile." I turned my head slowly, meeting her gaze. Her eyes were bright with predatory anticipation. She wanted me to snap. She wanted me to raise my voice or throw my drink so she could gesture to her country club friends and prove I was exactly the unhinged liability she had described. My federal audit training kicked in, suppressing every primal urge to strike back. I let the silence stretch between us, creating a vacuum of profound discomfort. "Nathan is at his breaking point." Martha continued stepping uncomfortably close. Her smile remained fixed, but her tone turned venomous. "You are draining him dry, Vivian. The credit card bills, the erratic behavior, it is exhausting for him. If you had any dignity left, you would pack your bags and leave that house before my son is forced to throw you out into the street." She waited for the explosion. I offered nothing. I held her gaze for 5 agonizing seconds, analyzing the desperate need for validation pooling in her pupils. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my sparkling water. I set the glass down on a napkin, nodded once, and walked away without uttering a single syllable. Behind me, I could feel Martha seething, her orchestrated confrontation collapsing into an anticlimax. Denying a narcissist their desired emotional reaction is the most devastating weapon you can deploy. I drove back to our property in the foothills, the quiet rhythm of the tires calming my adrenaline. The house was dark when I pulled into the driveway. Nathan had not returned from his supposed emergency meeting. I locked the deadbolt, walked into my home office, and secured the door. I bypassed my encrypted virtual private network and accessed the remote server housing the surveillance feeds from the living room. The digital archive showed new activity logged just 2 hours ago. I clicked the video file recorded by the optical sensor hidden in the hollow dictionary spine. The high-definition footage loaded in crisp color. Nathan and Martha were sitting on our leather sofa. There was no emergency supply chain meeting. Nathan was holding a heavy crystal tumbler filled with expensive amber bourbon. Martha sat across from him, holding a matching glass, celebrating the flawless execution of their whisper campaign. She did not even try to defend herself. Martha laughed on the recording, her voice echoing clearly through my secure headphones. She just stood at the bar looking utterly hollowed out. The entire country club knows she is a financial parasite, Nathan. You have the perfect justification for the divorce. No one will question it. Nathan took a long drink of his bourbon, leaning back against the cushions. He looked relaxed, arrogant, unburdened by the destruction of his marriage. "You set the stage perfectly, Mother," he said, his voice slurring slightly. "By the time I file the papers, she will not have a single friend left in this county to help her pay for a lawyer." The audio feed crackled as Martha leaned forward, setting her empty glass on the coffee table. Her expression hardened, shifting from celebratory gossip to cold financial calculation. "We need to initiate the next phase immediately," Martha instructed. "The regional bank approved the equity evaluation yesterday. I have the secondary mortgage application in my purse. We just need her signature." Nathan chuckled, a harsh grating sound that made my blood run cold. "Getting her to sign a loan document right now is impossible," he replied. "She is watching every piece of mail like a hawk." Martha reached into her designer handbag and pulled out a thick stack of legal documents. I leaned closer to my monitor, maximizing the video feed. "I do not need her physical consent, Nathan," she stated plainly. I lifted her digital signature from the tax returns we filed last year. "We are submitting the paperwork tomorrow morning. $150,000 pulled directly from the equity of this house. By the time the bank finalizes the transfer and she realizes the property is leveraged, we will have the cash to clear your manufacturing deficit, and she will be legally responsible for the debt." The video feed continued to play, but I stopped listening. My pulse hammered against my ribs, a calculating fury settling deep into my bones. They were not just stealing $40,000 from a joint savings account. They were actively conspiring to forge my identity on federal banking documents to extract a catastrophic fraudulent loan against the home I owned before I ever met Nathan. They intended to ruin my immaculate credit, bind me to an inescapable financial obligation, and leave me destitute. I paused the recording, isolating the audio file of their premeditated felony. They thought they were playing a local social game. They had no idea they just handed a federal investigator the exact confession needed to destroy their entire existence. The morning air hung heavy with a damp Appalachian chill biting through the wool of my sweater as I stood motionless behind the living room curtains. I watched my own breath fog the cold glass, wiping it away with my sleeve. For 3 consecutive days, I had meticulously recalibrated my morning routine, tracking the precise arrival time of our local postal carrier. My husband was upstairs, running the shower, oblivious to the surveillance grid tightening around him. He operated under the assumption that his timeline remained secure. Knowing your adversary is preparing an offensive maneuver grants you the distinct advantage of shaping the battlefield. The familiar rumble of the mail truck echoed down the gravel road. The distinctive squeal of its brakes signaled the drop-off. I waited until the vehicle departed before slipping out the front door. The frosted Bermuda grass crunched beneath my boots. I retrieved a thick stack of correspondence from the metal box and swiftly returned to the sanctuary of my home office, sliding the deadbolt into place. I bypassed the glossy catalogs and utility invoices, tossing them aside, until a heavy manila envelope emerged. The embossed logo of a prominent regional lending institution caught the morning light. It was addressed to both Nathan and me. I retrieved a stainless steel letter opener, slicing the top fold with measured precision to preserve the return address. Inside rested a dense stack of loan origination paperwork. The pages smelled of fresh toner and bureaucratic doom. I spread the crisp sheets across my oak desk, my eyes scanning the boilerplate text with the ingrained speed of a federal investigator. There it was, buried on page 4. A secondary home equity line of credit application. The requested sum was $150,000. It was a number perfectly calculated to drain the maximum allowable equity without triggering a mandatory in-person appraisal. The collateral listed was this very house, the property I had purchased entirely with my own savings 2 years before Nathan and I ever exchanged vows. My gaze drifted to the bottom margin of the final sheet. A digital signature bearing my full legal name sat perfectly aligned on the dotted line. The pixels were sharp, betraying no hesitation. It was a digital ghost haunting a fraudulent contract. It was a flawless replication of the electronic authorization I used to sign our joint tax filings last spring. Martha had executed her threat with chilling accuracy. She had lifted my digital identity, pasted it onto a binding financial contract, and submitted it to a major lender. If this application reached the final approval stage, the cascading effects would be catastrophic. Those funds would be wired directly into the phantom corporate entity Martha controlled. The money would vanish instantly, absorbing the severe deficits at Nathan Manufacturing Plant and whatever other hidden debts they harbored. Meanwhile, the bank would place a secondary lien on my home. Defense contractors require pristine financial backgrounds to maintain security clearances. A defaulted 6-figure loan would red flag my profile during my next review. When the loan inevitably went into default, my pristine credit score would shatter. The bank would foreclose. I would lose my sanctuary and remain legally bound to a staggering debt, while my husband walked away financially cleansed. A sharp spike of adrenaline hit my chest. The sheer audacity of their plan was breathtaking. They were weaponizing my own prudence against me, turning my hard-earned stability into a financial prison. But panic is a liability in my profession. I forced my breathing to slow, channeling the rising heat into cold, analytical focus. Canceling the application was the obvious civilian response. A frantic phone call to the branch manager claiming identity theft would halt the processing. But halting the loan would simply send Nathan and Martha scurrying back into the shadows to devise a new method of extraction. I did not want to block their punch. I wanted to break their arm. I picked up my encrypted mobile device and dialed a private Washington area code. The line rang twice before a deep, familiar voice answered. Elias Thorne and I had shared a cramped cubicle during our inaugural year at the Defense Contract Audit Agency. We spent countless hours fueled by stale coffee, dissecting convoluted offshore shell companies designed to siphon taxpayer money from government contracts. Elias had since transitioned out of the defense sector, taking a senior compliance director role at a federal banking oversight agency. He possessed an unparalleled talent for tracking digital financial footprints. Vivian. His voice echoed through the receiver, carrying a tone of pleasant surprise. I have not heard from you since you transferred down to the Huntsville division. Tell me you are calling with a juicy supply chain puzzle. I need a favor, Elias, I said, keeping my voice steady. A delicate, highly compartmentalized favor. The casual warmth in his tone vanished, replaced instantly by the sharp professionalism of a seasoned investigator. Talk to me, he instructed. I laid out the entire architecture of the fraud. I detailed the missing $40,000 the phantom corporate entity registered to my mother-in-law and the forged equity loan sitting on my desk. I did not embellish the betrayal or seek emotional validation. I presented the facts as a sterile, auditable ledger. Elias remained silent for a long moment, digesting the raw data. They are using a lifted digital signature to leverage a premarital asset, he summarized, his voice dropping to a low, serious register. Federal regulators do not look kindly on legacy families playing fast and loose with equity lines. That is wire fraud, identity theft, and bank fraud wrapped into one neat little package. Wire fraud carries a 20-year maximum sentence per count. Identity theft adds mandatory consecutive time. You are building a prison for them, Vivian. You need to freeze your credit profile right now. If I freeze it, they will know I found the application, I explained, pacing the length of my office. They will destroy the devices they used to submit the paperwork and claim their accounts were hacked. I need you to flag the application on the back end, Elias. Do not stop it from entering the system. Reroute it. A soft chuckle came through the speaker. You want to set a snare? I want the fraud department to initiate a silent trace, I corrected. When a high-value equity application is flagged for suspicious origin, the security algorithms automatically log the exact IP address the packet was transmitted from. I want the federal banking regulators to track that digital signature straight back to Martha residential router. When the authorities knock on her door, I need undeniable proof that the call came from inside her house. Give me the application sequence number. Elias said, the sound of rapid typing echoing in the background. I will place a silent quarantine on the file. The local branch will see it as pending manual review, but our oversight algorithms will execute a deep diagnostic on the transmission origin. They are not getting a single dime, Vivian. And when this springs shut, the federal prosecutors will have a ribbon-tied evidentiary package. I read him the alphanumeric code at the top of the document. We synchronized our timelines, agreeing to maintain strict operational security until the IP trace finalized. I ended the call, feeling a profound sense of tactical superiority. I had successfully insulated my property and transformed their offensive maneuver into a lethal trap. I carefully slipped the forged documents back into the manila envelope and hid them inside a biometric safe bolted beneath my floorboards. I dressed for work, selecting a tailored navy suit that projected unyielding authority. The commute into Huntsville was a blur of highway markers and morning commuters. The sprawling campus of my aerospace employer loomed ahead, a fortress of glass and steel dedicated to national defense. I drove toward the headquarters, mentally preparing to dissect a routine logistics report. I felt entirely in control. That illusion of control shattered the moment I approached the reinforced security turnstiles. I swiped my identification card over the optical reader, expecting the familiar green light and the soft chime of entry. Instead, the reader flashed a harsh crimson red. The heavy steel turnstile locked into place, refusing to budge. The ambient noise of the bustling lobby faded into a muted ringing in my ears. My encrypted work phone vibrated fiercely against my hip. I pulled it from my pocket, expecting a calendar reminder. Instead, the screen displayed an urgent Priority Level 0 notification from the facility security officer. In the classified aerospace sector, a Priority Level 0 is never a routine matter. It is a siren. The message was brief, sterile, and terrifying. I was ordered to report immediately to the Subterranean Internal Security Division. All system access privileges had been temporarily suspended. My stomach plummeted into an icy abyss. My badge no longer granted me access to the logistics floors. The elevators would only take me down to the windowless interrogation suites used for espionage debriefings. Nathan had realized his physical theft might leave traces. He understood that my career was my ultimate shield. While I had been busy securing my house and setting financial traps, my husband had initiated a parallel strike, targeting the very foundation of my livelihood. He had not just attacked my bank accounts. He had orchestrated a direct assault on my top-secret federal security clearance. And in the defense industry, losing your clearance does not just mean losing your job. It means facing the crushing weight of a federal tribunal. I stepped into the descending elevator, the steel doors closing like the jaws of a trap. The steel doors of the subterranean elevator parted with a soft, pneumatic hiss. I stepped into the restricted corridor of the Internal Security Division. The air down here tasted sterile, filtered through heavy industrial scrubbers. Fluorescent bulbs buzzed overhead, casting a harsh, shadowless glare against cinder block walls. This level of the aerospace campus did not exist on public directory maps. It served as a quarantined zone, designed to interrogate anomalies and neutralize espionage threats before they reached the Pentagon. My low heels tapped a steady rhythm on the polished concrete. I maintained a rigid posture, keeping my breathing measured. 2 armed facility guards flanked the entrance to Briefing Room 4. They pulled the heavy acoustic door open without a word. I walked inside. A single stainless steel table occupied the center of the cramped space. Director Donovan sat at the far end. He possessed the lean, weathered frame of a career counterintelligence operative. His salt and pepper hair was cropped close to his scalp. His dark eyes evaluated me with the clinical detachment of a surgeon preparing to excise a tumor. In my tenure as a supply chain auditor, I had only crossed paths with Donovan twice. Both instances involved isolating severe external data breaches. His presence today meant the internal threat matrix had targeted my specific profile. "Take a seat, Vivian," he instructed, his tone devoid of pleasantries. I pulled out the metal chair and sat, resting my leather briefcase on my lap. Donovan slid a thin manila folder across the cold table. He did not open it. "We are monitoring incoming communications directed at the defense hotline." He began leaning forward. "A localized transmission was intercepted this morning. It detailed a highly specific narrative claiming you have been compiling classified logistical schematics from our secure servers. The communication further alleged you intend to broker these supply chain algorithms to a foreign agricultural tech competitor." I stared at the closed folder. Nathan had executed his corporate ambush exactly as I had predicted. He assumed the labyrinthine bureaucracy of a federal contractor would swallow me whole. He calculated that internal security would prioritize immediate containment over due process, resulting in my swift termination. Stripping away my clearance would eliminate my primary source of income and shatter my credibility, leaving me defenseless against his impending financial extraction. He expected me to sit in this windowless room, crying, pleading for my job, and trying to explain away fabricated evidence. I unlatched my briefcase. I did not offer a frantic denial. In the defense sector, premature defensiveness often registers as an indicator of guilt. Instead, I retrieved a bound dossier I had compiled 72 hours prior. I placed it squarely on top of his manila folder. "The tip you intercepted is a fabrication," I stated. My voice, carrying the crisp cadence of an official audit. "However, the digital intrusion it references is genuine. A hostile actor did attempt to extract proprietary data from my residential network. I anticipated this maneuver." Donovan frowned, his veteran instincts snagging on my lack of panic. "You are confirming a data breach on your home network?" he asked. "I am verifying a localized domestic espionage incident I corrected. I engineered a containment environment before the intrusion occurred." I opened my dossier, turning to the primary exhibit. 4 days ago, I detected unauthorized scanning protocols probing my router firewall. Rather than blocking the intrusion, I constructed a digital honeypot. I placed a simulated logistics file directly on my personal desktop. The document appeared to contain classified aerospace supply chain algorithms, but it actually consisted of worthless randomized code strings. I embedded a silent tracking beacon deep within the file metadata. I slid a printed diagnostic log across the steel table. Last Friday evening, while I attended a public charity gala at the Botanical Gardens, someone bypassed my network security and downloaded that specific decoy file. The beacon activated upon extraction, transmitting a real-time location ping back to my off-site secure server. Donovan scrutinized the diagnostic log. His eyes darted across the columns of alphanumeric code, tracing the data path with his index finger. "The ping originated from within your own house," he murmured, connecting the dots. I nodded, presenting the next page of evidence. The timestamp on the download aligns perfectly with my confirmed presence at the gala. I have attached sworn statements from 3 event organizers who interacted with me during that precise window. Furthermore, the network diagnostic proves the intrusion was executed using a personal laptop registered to my husband, Nathan Pierce. The silence in the interrogation room grew dense. Director Donovan was no longer looking at a potential traitor. He was looking at an auditor who had successfully baited and trapped a domestic spy. The implications of a civilian spouse attempting to steal defense data to frame a cleared employee elevated the situation from a marital dispute to a federal concern. "Why would your husband orchestrate a false flag operation?" Donovan asked, his voice dropping to a serious register. "He is attempting to conceal severe financial irregularities," I explained, keeping my emotional distance from the facts. "He liquidated our joint assets to cover hidden debts linked to his automotive manufacturing plant. When I initiated an inquiry into the missing funds, he realized my security clearance was my most valuable asset. He orchestrated this anonymous tip to force my termination. He assumed your division would act swiftly and ruthlessly without verifying the source of the leak." Donovan closed my dossier and steepled his fingers. "You took a substantial risk, Vivian. If that beacon had failed, or if he had bypassed your honeypot, you would be facing prosecution under the Espionage Act." "The beacon performed flawlessly," I replied. "I trust my architecture." The liaison let out a slow, measured breath. The rigid tension in his shoulders relaxed, signaling a shift in the interrogation parameters. "Your security clearance remains active, Vivian. We will initiate a silent quarantine around your profile, shielding it from any further anonymous submissions." "I need you to take it a step further, Director," I said, leaning forward slightly. "My husband believes he successfully extracted classified data. By utilizing an interstate telecommunications network to transmit what he believed were stolen defense secrets to a federal hotline, he committed a felony. I want your office to formally loop in the Federal Bureau of Investigation." Donovan offered a curt, grim nod. "We protect our own, Vivian. The Bureau will receive a full briefing before the end of the day. Maintain your regular schedule. Do not alert him to our involvement. We will monitor his digital footprint from this end." I left the subterranean facility with my professional armor fully intact. The crisp afternoon air felt invigorating as I walked to my car. Nathan had fired his most devastating weapon, hoping to obliterate my standing in the aerospace sector. Instead, he had unknowingly invited the full weight of the United States intelligence apparatus directly into his own living room. The drive home required me to prepare for my next performance. I needed to portray the image of a shattered, panicked wife reeling from a devastating corporate inquiry. I pulled into our gravel driveway, forcing my breathing to become shallow and erratic. I gripped my briefcase with white knuckles and rushed through the front door. Nathan was standing in the kitchen, pouring a glass of iced water. He wore his crisp manager attire, but the facade was cracking. Sweat beaded on his forehead, reflecting the harsh overhead lights. He was pacing, tracing agitated circles on the linoleum floor. He expected me to arrive in tears, carrying a cardboard box filled with my desk belongings. He expected victory. I dropped my keys onto the counter, letting them clatter loudly. I slumped against the wall, burying my face in my hands. "They called me into security," I whispered, my voice trembling with manufactured terror. "Someone submitted an anonymous tip. They interrogated me for 2 hours, Nathan. They suspended my system access." Nathan froze his hand, gripping the glass so tightly his knuckles turned pale. He tried to suppress a triumphant smirk, masking it with a look of feigned concern. "What do you mean, Vivian?" he asked, stepping closer. "Why would they interrogate you?" "They think I stole data." I sobbed, covering my eyes to hide the cold calculation burning within them. "I do not understand what is happening. My career might be over." But the director said they are bringing in federal agents to trace the IP address of whoever submitted the tip. They said they will find the source by the end of the week. Nathan exhaled a long, shaky breath. The smug satisfaction vanished from his eyes, replaced by sheer, unadulterated terror. He reached out and placed a stiff, awkward hand on my shoulder. "We will figure this out," he murmured, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "You just need to cooperate with them. Maybe it is for the best. You have been under so much stress lately." He turned back to the sink, hiding his face, but the reflection in the window betrayed his frantic energy. He thought the trap had closed. He thought I was helpless. I watched him wipe the sweat from his brow, a man drowning in his own hubris. As the evening progressed, his celebratory mood soured into nervous agitation. I sat silently on the sofa, watching him pace the length of the living room. He kept checking his phone, waiting for the inevitable follow-up from my employer. He expected a termination notice. He expected the local police to arrive and escort me away. As hours ticked by with no further action, the uncertainty began to erode his confidence. The mention of a federal IP trace had planted a seed of profound paranoia in his mind. Around midnight, he retreated to the guest bedroom, claiming he needed quiet to prepare for a morning meeting. I remained in the dark living room, monitoring the hidden optical sensors through my secure device. Nathan was not sleeping. He was pacing the floorboards, dialing his phone with frantic urgency. The corporate ambush had not delivered the immediate fatal blow he required. His timeline was collapsing. I watched his shadow move beneath the doorframe, knowing his desperation was about to escalate. He was realizing that bureaucratic sabotage was too slow, and his digital tracks were exposed. If he wanted to eliminate the evidence I held, he would have to abandon the shadows and launch a direct physical strike. The digital war was ending, and a much more dangerous confrontation was seconds away. The clock on my nightstand displayed 1:58 in glowing crimson numbers. The master bedroom was shrouded in deep winter darkness. I lay perfectly still beneath the heavy cotton duvet, regulating my inhalations to mimic the deep, rhythmic cadence of restorative sleep. My husband believed I was sedated by the exhaustion of a ruined career. He presumed the corporate inquiry he orchestrated had shattered my resolve, leaving me vulnerable and oblivious to my surroundings. He was incorrect. My eyes were wide open, fixed on the illuminated screen of my encrypted mobile device, hidden beneath the edge of my pillow. During my initial field certification as a supply chain auditor, I spent 3 grueling weeks stationed at a remote logistics hub in the Nevada desert. The assignment required monitoring nocturnal cargo manifests to expose a phantom shipping syndicate. That deployment taught me the crucial art of hypervigilance. It rewired my circadian rhythm, proving that sleep is merely a luxury when an active threat occupies your immediate perimeter. I channeled that same desert discipline now, listening to the ambient sounds of my own house. At precisely 2 o'clock, the silent alarm interface on my smartphone flashed a soft amber warning. The secondary motion sensor positioned inside our attached garage had detected localized movement. The motorized garage door did not open, preventing any mechanical noise from echoing through the floorboards. Nathan had bypassed the loud overhead track, manually unlatching the side pedestrian entrance. I watched the live, high-definition feed as two silhouettes slipped into the mudroom. One shadow belonged to my husband. The other was a stranger. The unknown individual wore a dark hooded sweatshirt and carried a specialized weatherproof Pelican case. A common burglar would immediately target the living room electronics or the jewelry boxes sitting exposed on the entryway credenza. This intruder ignored every valuable item in his path. He moved with the focused urgency of a professional operative guided directly down the hallway by Nathan. They bypassed the kitchen and headed straight toward my locked home office. I tapped the screen, shifting the camera angle to the optical lens concealed within the smoke detector above my desk. The feed transitioned in the crisp grayscale night vision. Nathan produced a physical key, unlocking the office door. He had copied my master set during one of my recent weekend trips. The stranger stepped inside, placing his heavy case onto my oak desk. He unzipped the nylon compartments, revealing an array of complex decryption hardware and bypass cables. Nathan paced near the doorway, wiping his palms against his slacks. His earlier corporate ambush had failed to yield my instant termination. The federal tracing threat I planted in his mind had pushed him past the point of rational strategy. He realized bureaucratic sabotage was too slow, and his own digital tracks were dangerously exposed. He needed to physically eradicate the evidence I held regarding his financial theft and the forged home equity loan. He had brought a mercenary into my sanctuary to execute a digital scorched earth protocol. A standard civilian reaction would involve dialing emergency services and barricading the bedroom door. But deploying local law enforcement presented a significant tactical vulnerability. Martha held considerable sway with the county precinct commanders. If uniformed officers arrived, Nathan would simply play the role of the frustrated spouse. He would claim the stranger was a trusted colleague helping to repair a corrupted hard drive on a shared family computer. The authorities would likely dismiss the entire incident as a domestic misunderstanding, allowing the intruder to walk away without consequence. I could not risk handing them an easy exit. I needed to paralyze them within their own snare. The stranger booted up his external rig, plugging a tether cord into the side port of my secured work laptop. He initiated a brute force sequence attempting to fracture my primary firewall. He operated under the assumption that he was attacking a static, dormant machine. He did not know the hardware was linked to a responsive cloud architecture designed to quarantine hostile incursions. I tapped a sequence of override commands into my mobile interface. I did not shut down the computer. Instead, I executed a localized system lockdown protocol. The trap sprang shut in microseconds. Down the hall, inside the dark office, the screen of my laptop suddenly flared with a blinding white light, illuminating the intruder's face in perfect clarity. The custom protocol deactivated the external ports, freezing his decryption software and trapping his unique media access control address within my secure firewall log. His digital fingerprint was now permanently cataloged on a federal server. The stranger recoiled, his eyes wide with sudden panic. He frantically tapped his keyboard, attempting to sever the connection, but the tether cord was electronically locked by the port interface. He yanked the wire, physically snapping the plastic connector in his haste to disconnect. The high-resolution optical sensor above the desk captured every micro-expression of his terror, recording his unobstructed facial features from 3 distinct angles. Nathan stumbled backward, bumping into the doorframe. "What did you do?" he hissed, his voice barely a whisper but picked up clearly by the hidden microphone. The stranger shoved his equipment back into the Pelican case, zipping it with trembling hands. "She trapped the rig," he replied, his tone frantic. "The system pinged my outbound signal. We need to leave right now." They scrambled out of the office, leaving the door ajar. I tracked their hasty retreat through the hallway cameras, watching them slip back through the mudroom and disappear into the cold night. The entire intrusion lasted less than 6 minutes. I remained in bed, regulating my heart rate until the sound of a starting engine faded down the gravel road. Only then did I rise. I walked down the hall, stepping into my office. The air still held the faint metallic scent of ozone and the stranger's nervous sweat. My laptop sat on the desk, the screen now dark, the broken piece of the tether cord protruding from the side port. I returned to my secure mobile device, extracting the pristine images of the intruder's face captured by the smoke detector lens. I ran the biometric data through an open-source corporate intelligence database utilized by industry auditors to vet supply chain vendors. The algorithms processed the facial geometry, cross-referencing municipal directories and corporate registries. The system returned a definitive match within 30 seconds. The man in the hooded sweatshirt was not a random operative sourced from the dark web. His name was Marcus Cole, an independent information technology contractor currently retained by Nathan Automotive Manufacturing Plant. The implications of this discovery expanded my tactical advantage exponentially. Nathan was no longer merely stealing from our joint accounts or forging my signature on residential loan documents. He was actively misappropriating his employer's corporate resources, utilizing an automotive plant contractor to conduct domestic espionage and attempt the destruction of classified aerospace files. By crossing that specific boundary, Nathan had linked his personal crimes directly to his professional sphere. The conflict remained firmly entrenched in the realm of white-collar warfare. There would be no broken glass, no physical violence, no screaming matches on the front lawn. I had successfully insulated my digital perimeter and captured the identity of his mercenary. But playing defense was no longer sufficient. Nathan had attempted a fatal strike against my livelihood and my sanctuary. It was time to initiate the ultimate offensive maneuver. I needed to locate the foundational rot sustaining their entire operation. The $40,000 stolen from my savings was merely a symptom of a much deeper disease. I returned to my desk, pulling up the encrypted ledger files I had extracted from Pierce Automotive Holdings. The shell company Martha governed held the structural blueprints of their demise. I cracked my knuckles, preparing to dive into the phantom accounts. I was going to find out exactly where the money was bleeding, and I was going to sever the artery. The dawn broke over the Appalachian foothills, casting long gray shadows across my home office. The broken tether cord still rested on my desk, a physical reminder of the digital war Nathan had brought into my sanctuary. I poured a fresh cup of black coffee, letting the bitter warmth sharpen my focus. Identifying the mercenary as an automotive plant contractor had shifted my perspective. Nathan was utilizing his professional resources to execute domestic crimes, but the motive still felt incomplete. A regional manager facing an inventory shortfall might embezzle funds, but he would not typically risk federal wire fraud, identity theft, and hiring rogue hackers unless a much darker threat loomed over his head. I opened my secured laptop, routing my connection through 3 distinct proxy servers before accessing the encrypted ledger files I had extracted from Pierce Automotive Holdings. The shell company served as a financial nexus for Martha and her son. I initiated a deep diagnostic on the transaction history, deploying an automated tracing algorithm I frequently use to untangle labyrinthine defense subcontractor payouts. The algorithm highlighted the $40,000 stolen from my savings, tracking its movement through a series of obfuscated domestic accounts. The funds did not flow into the operational budget of Nathan Manufacturing Plant. They bypassed the factory ledgers entirely. Instead, The money was fragmented into 3 equal installments and wired to a cluster of offshore accounts registered in the Cayman Islands. I leaned closer to the monitor, my eyes scanning the destination routing codes. I pulled the corporate registry for the offshore entities, cross-referencing the listed beneficiaries against the employee database of Nathan Automotive Facility. The search engine returned 3 distinct matches. The offshore accounts belonged to 3 senior supply chain managers who worked directly under Nathan. The anomaly was glaring. A regional manager does not wire massive sums of untraceable cash to his own subordinates unless he is purchasing their silence. I pivoted my investigation, targeting the historical financial footprint of my mother-in-law. Before Martha became the reigning matriarch of the Huntsville Country Club, she inherited a substantial portfolio of commercial agricultural land near the Gulf Coast. 10 years ago, a severe hurricane decimated the region. Public records indicated Martha filed a catastrophic crop loss claim, receiving a staggering payout from a federal agricultural insurance program. That influx of cash funded her sprawling estate and cemented her high society status. But a forensic auditor knows that sudden wealth often conceals a foundational lie. I accessed public satellite imagery of her agricultural tracts from the year of the hurricane, comparing the historical weather patterns to the damage reports filed in her insurance claim. The discrepancy was undeniable. The storm path had entirely missed her primary acreage. Martha had submitted fabricated geological surveys and inflated yield projections to defraud the federal government out of millions. The pieces of the puzzle locked together, forming a devastating picture. The supply chain managers at Nathan Plant specialized in auditing agricultural transport vectors. They had somehow uncovered the truth about Martha's fabricated insurance claim. Rather than reporting the federal felony, they chose to weaponize it. They were systematically blackmailing the Huntsville matriarch, demanding exorbitant payouts to keep her secret buried. Nathan was not the calculated mastermind orchestrating a brilliant financial empire. He was a terrified accomplice, a desperate son drowning under the weight of his mother-criminal past. The extortionists were squeezing them dry, draining their liquid assets and forcing Nathan to plunder his own marriage to satisfy their relentless demands. His gaslighting, his whisper campaigns, his frantic attempts to forge my signature on an equity loan, all of it stemmed from a suffocating, primal fear of seeing his mother escorted into a federal penitentiary. Understanding the true motive did not inspire a single ounce of sympathy within me. Pity is a luxury reserved for those who do not attempt to destroy innocent bystanders to save themselves. Nathan had chosen to sacrifice my career, my credit, and my sanity rather than hold his mother accountable. He had earned the destruction I was preparing to deliver. I spent the next 6 hours meticulously compiling the evidence. I linked the stolen $40,000 to the offshore routing numbers, creating a definitive money map. I downloaded the fraudulent agricultural insurance claims, cross-referencing them with the undeniable satellite data. I attached the audio recording of Nathan and Martha discussing the forged secondary mortgage application, along with the high-resolution images of the IT contractor attempting to breach my network. I structured the documents into an airtight federal prosecution packet, formatting it perfectly for the Securities and Exchange Commission and the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The trap was fully armed. But I could not simply hand the packet to the authorities. If I submitted the evidence directly, Nathan and Martha would immediately claim the documents were circumstantial or somehow manipulated by a vindictive spouse. I needed Nathan to authenticate the baseline financial records himself. I needed him to step into a formal legal arena and commit a fatal error on the public record. To provoke that error, I needed to force his hand using a calculated diversion. A skilled investigator knows that the most effective way to trap a panicked adversary is to offer them an illusion of control. I needed a red herring. I left my home office and walked into the pristine kitchen. Sunlight now streamed through the large bay windows, illuminating the granite countertops. I picked up the communal tablet we kept on the kitchen island for recipes and calendar sharing. I disabled the screen lock and opened the primary web browser. I typed a specific query into the search engine, selecting the most aggressive, high-profile results. Top divorce attorneys in Huntsville, Alabama. Extreme Asset Division lawyers. Emergency financial restraining orders. I left the browser window open, turning the screen brightness to its maximum setting. I placed the tablet squarely in the center of the kitchen island, right beside the espresso machine Nathan used every morning. I retreated to the living room, taking a seat on the sofa with a novel, keeping my posture relaxed and unassuming. An hour later, Nathan emerged from the guest bedroom. He wore a rumpled undershirt, his eyes bloodshot from a night spent pacing and worrying about his failed digital intrusion. He walked into the kitchen, his footsteps heavy against the hardwood floor. I listened to the clatter of a ceramic mug, the hiss of the espresso machine, and then a sudden, profound silence. From my vantage point, I watched his reflection in the hallway mirror. Nathan was staring at the illuminated tablet screen, his face drained of all color. His chest hitched as his breathing turned shallow and rapid. He interpreted the search history exactly as I intended. He believed I had discovered his infidelity to our vows and was preparing to hire a ruthless attorney to strip him of his remaining assets. He assumed I was planning to file for divorce and blindside him with a financial freeze. In the mind of a cornered narcissist, the only defense is a preemptive strike. He could not allow me to dictate the terms of our separation. If I filed first, I would control the narrative and immediately demand an accounting of the missing savings. He needed to lock down the battlefield before I could retain legal counsel. Nathan hastily abandoned his coffee, turning off the tablet screen and rushing back toward the guest bedroom. He grabbed his keys and his jacket, his movements frantic and uncoordinated. He did not say a word to me as he hurried through the front door, the hinges rattling as he pulled it shut. The roar of his truck engine echoed through the quiet foothill morning, tires spinning against the gravel as he sped toward the city center. He was rushing straight to the county courthouse. He intended to file an emergency at-fault divorce petition, requesting an immediate freeze on all marital assets to prevent me from accessing funds to hire a lawyer. He planned to submit fabricated bank statements to the judge, painting me as an erratic spender hiding money. He thought he was striking a masterful preemptive blow, securing his financial perimeter and outsmarting his naive wife. He was entirely blinded by his own panic. He failed to realize that stepping into a courtroom and swearing an oath over falsified financial documents was the exact trap I required. He was walking willingly onto a judicial stage where his lies would instantly transform into actionable perjury. As the sound of his vehicle faded into the distance, I closed my novel and smiled a genuine expression of profound tactical satisfaction. The pieces were perfectly positioned on the board. The endgame had officially begun. The heavy oak doors of the Madison County Courthouse swung open, echoing with a dull final thud against the polished marble walls. The corridor outside the Family Law Division smelled of old floor wax and desperate negotiations. I sat at the respondent table inside courtroom 4, keeping my spine perfectly straight and my hands folded neatly over a pristine leather portfolio. The ambient noise of clerks shuffling paperwork filled the void. I did not look around the room. An auditor knows that displaying anxiety only serves to embolden an adversary. Beside me sat Caroline Reed. I had not hired a standard divorce attorney who specialized in dividing silverware and negotiating weekend visitation schedules. I required a specialized weapon. Caroline spent 15 years as a federal prosecutor dismantling white-collar syndicates for the Department of Justice before transitioning to private practice. She wore a tailored charcoal suit and possessed the chilling, serene focus of a predator waiting for its prey to wander into a snare. I handed her my forensic findings 3 days ago. She reviewed the offshore routing numbers, the phantom corporate entity, and the fraudulent insurance claims with a predatory smile. Today, we were not defending a marriage. We were executing a tactical demolition. The courtroom doors opened again. Nathan strode down the center aisle, exuding an unearned, arrogant swagger. He wore a crisp navy suit, his hair styled meticulously to project the image of a successful, grounded, Southern executive victimized by an unstable partner. Beside him walked his legal counsel, a flamboyant local attorney named Bradley, who was known for theatrical courtroom maneuvers and exorbitant billing rates. Bradley carried a thin briefcase projecting supreme confidence. They expected to find me sitting alone, unrepresented, and shattered by the sudden filing. Nathan paused when he saw Caroline sitting next to me. A microscopic flicker of uncertainty crossed his features, but his sheer narcissistic momentum carried him forward. He took his seat at the petitioner table, refusing to make eye contact with me. He believed his preemptive strike had locked me out of our banking portals and neutralized my ability to fight back. He assumed I was a naive civilian caught in a bureaucratic landslide. Judge Warren entered from his private chambers, a stern veteran jurist who possessed zero tolerance for courtroom theatrics. The bailiff called the room to order, and the emergency proceedings commenced. Bradley stood immediately, adjusting his silk tie. He launched into a meticulously rehearsed narrative designed to assassinate my character on the public record. He painted a tragic portrait of his client, claiming Nathan was a devoted husband struggling to protect his legacy from an erratic wife. Bradley informed the court that I was secretly draining marital funds, exhibiting severe paranoia, and preparing to flee the jurisdiction with hidden assets. He requested an immediate injunction granting Nathan exclusive control over all properties and bank accounts. To substantiate these claims, Bradley approached the bench carrying a clear plastic folder. He submitted Exhibit A into the official court record. It was a stack of bank statements Nathan had personally generated. I looked at the documents from across the room, recognizing the layout immediately. Nathan had altered our joint account ledgers, fabricating transactions to make it appear as though I had wired the missing $40,000 into a private offshore trust under my own name. He was attempting to project his precise crime onto my ledger. It was a bold, desperate maneuver. Caroline did not leap from her chair to object. She did not shout about forged evidence or demand the documents be stricken. She remained seated, taking a slow, deliberate sip from her water glass. We needed the trap to spring shut organically. We needed the lie to become a binding oath. Judge Warren reviewed the fabricated statements, his brow furrowing. He looked down at the petitioner table. "Mr. Pierce," the judge said, his voice echoing with stern authority. "You are submitting these financial disclosures as a true and accurate representation of your marital estate." Nathan stood up, buttoning his suit jacket. He looked directly at the judge, his face a mask of earnest sincerity. "Yes, Your Honor," he replied. "My wife has been quietly moving our savings for months. I only discovered the transfers recently. I filed this emergency petition to stop her from bankrupting our family." The judge nodded, turning his gaze toward our table. "Ms. Reed," he prompted, "does the respondent have a defense against this financial disclosure?" Caroline stood smoothing the lapels of her jacket. She picked up a heavy reinforced binder from the floor and placed it onto the polished wood of our table. The dense stack of paper landed with a profound, authoritative thud that silenced the room. "We do not object to the admission of Exhibit A, Your Honor," Caroline stated, her voice ringing with crystalline clarity. "In fact, we welcome it. It provides essential context for the true nature of the petitioner's financial conduct." Bradley frowned, his theatrical confidence wavering. He leaned forward, eyeing the monumental binder Caroline was now opening. Caroline turned to the first page. "Mr. Pierce," she began, directing her gaze at my husband, Are you familiar with a corporate entity registered as Pierce Automotive Holdings, LLC? All the color instantly vanished from Nathan's face. The smug facade fractured, replaced by sheer, unadulterated terror. He gripped the edge of his table, his knuckles turning bone white. He opened his mouth to speak, but his throat seized. "Objection," Bradley interjected, though his voice lacked conviction. "Relevance. We are here to discuss the respondent's hidden assets, not my client's business ventures." "The relevance, counselor, is that your client just committed perjury," Caroline countered seamlessly, pivoting back to the judge. "The bank statements, submitted as Exhibit A, are clumsy digital forgeries. The respondent is a cleared federal aerospace supply chain auditor. When she noticed irregularities in her household accounts, she conducted a thorough forensic trace. The missing $40,000 was not moved by my client. It was wired by the petitioner directly into Pierce Automotive Holdings, a phantom shell company registered solely to his mother, Martha Pierce." Caroline withdrew a certified banking manifest from her binder, handing copies to the clerk and sliding one across the aisle to Bradley. Furthermore, Caroline continued her tone relentless and precise. "The stolen marital funds did not remain in that shell company. They were systematically fragmented and wired to 3 offshore accounts located in the Cayman Islands. Accounts registered to 3 senior supply chain managers currently employed under the petitioner's direct supervision at his manufacturing plant." The courtroom atmosphere shifted from a routine domestic dispute to the epicenter of a criminal conspiracy. Judge Warren leaned forward, his expression hardening into dark judicial scrutiny. "My client uncovered a staggering extortion ring," Caroline explained, presenting the undeniable satellite data and the fraudulent agricultural insurance claims to the court. Martha Pierce defrauded a federal insurance program 10 years ago. The supply chain managers discovered the felony and initiated a blackmail campaign. The petitioner has been embezzling marital funds, liquidating joint assets, and attempting to forge his wife's signature on a secondary home equity line of credit, all to pay off his mother, extortionists. Bradley stared at the certified routing numbers, the federal headers on the audit pages, and the undeniable proof of wire fraud resting on his table. A seasoned defense attorney knows precisely when a client has turned them into an unwitting accessory to a felony. Bradley physically pushed his chair backward, creating a vast visual distance between himself and Nathan. He held his hands up in a gesture of immediate surrender. "Your Honor," Bradley stammered, his voice tight with panic. "I was not made aware of these documents or these transactions by my client." "You suborned perjury in my courtroom, Mr. Bradley," Judge Warren warned, his voice dropping to a terrifying register. Nathan stood frozen, unable to articulate a single syllable of defense. The illusion of his pristine, high society life was dissolving into ash right in front of him. He looked at me, his eyes wide with a desperate, pleading recognition. He finally understood the magnitude of the adversary he had provoked. "To ensure the integrity of this estate and prevent further destruction of my client's assets," Caroline concluded, "we are formally submitting this 400-page forensic audit into the public record. Additionally, we are requesting an immediate subpoena for Martha Pierce, compelling her appearance as a hostile witness and co-conspirator to federal bank fraud." Judge Warren did not hesitate. He struck his gavel with punishing force. The emergency petition filed by the husband was instantly dismissed. "Given the severe nature of these documented allegations and the clear evidence of perjury presented today, I am ordering an immediate and total freeze on all financial accounts, real estate holdings, and corporate entities linked to Nathan and Martha Pierce," the judge declared. "No assets may be transferred, sold, or leveraged. This court is formally referring this entire dossier to the state prosecutor's office and the Federal Banking Oversight Commission." The hearing concluded, leaving devastation in its wake. Nathan collapsed into his chair, a hollow man staring into an inescapable abyss. I gathered my leather portfolio, offering no parting words or sympathetic glances. I walked out of the courtroom with quiet dignity, my defensive perimeter flawlessly secured. But freezing an adversary assets does more than paralyze their bank accounts. It destroys their hidden structural supports. By locking down Martha's financial liquidity, I had unknowingly triggered the final stage of her ruin. She relied on a steady flow of illicit cash to satisfy a predatory hard money lender who held the true deed to her prized estate. Without access to her phantom funds, that predatory debt was about to default, leaving her sprawling mansion exposed and vulnerable to a hostile acquisition. The battle in the courtroom was over, but the ultimate financial liquidation was just beginning. The judicial freeze order did not merely halt transactions, it suffocated the entire Pierce ecosystem. A financial quarantine operates with silent, ruthless efficiency. By noon the following Tuesday, the ripple effects reached the manicured lawns of the Huntsville Country Club. Martha Pierce sat on the veranda enjoying her customary mimosa, surrounded by 3 women she considered her loyal court. She signaled the waiter, handing over her platinum credit card to cover the exorbitant luncheon tab. It was a daily ritual, designed to project effortless prosperity. 10 minutes later, the waiter returned. He did not bring a leather receipt book. He held the card between his fingers, his posture radiating profound discomfort. He leaned down, keeping his voice low, apologizing profusely as he explained the transaction had been denied by the issuer. Martha offered a tight, practiced smile, blaming a banking error, and retrieved a secondary card from her designer handbag. That piece of plastic declined too. Then the third. The polite silence enveloping the veranda grew heavy with unspoken judgment. Her peers watched with predatory fascination as the reigning matriarch was forced to excuse herself, leaving her lunch guests to settle the bill. The social humiliation was merely a surface fracture. Beneath her polished facade, a lethal structural failure had just occurred. In her desperation to satisfy the extortion demands from the supply chain managers, Martha had exhausted her liquid reserves months ago. To maintain the steady flow of blackmail payments, she had resorted to a perilous financial instrument. She procured a short-term, high-interest hard money loan from an unregulated private lender in the valley. Traditional banks require extensive underwriting and income verification. Hard money lenders bypass those regulations by demanding exorbitant collateral. Martha had pledged the deed to her prized Georgian estate as the sole guarantor. These predatory contracts carry strict, unforgiving covenants. A single missed payment triggers an automatic default clause, granting the lender immediate leverage to seize the property. The family court order had locked all her remaining accounts, preventing her from executing the monthly transfer. The moment the clock struck midnight, her loan transitioned into default status. I sat at my desk, reviewing the county property records I had been monitoring for weeks. The lien filed against her address confirmed the existence of the private debt. The lender was a local speculator who specialized in distressed assets and operated on razor-thin margins. He wanted fast cash, not a prolonged foreclosure battle tying up his capital. During my 3 years climbing the ranks at the aerospace defense contractor, I had accumulated a substantial portfolio of vested stock options. I had never touched them, treating the shares as an untouchable sanctuary fund. The time had arrived to deploy that capital. I routed the funds through a newly formed clean shell corporation I named Apex Resolution Holdings, ensuring my personal identity remained shielded from public registries. Acting as the managing director of Apex, I contacted the distressed lender. He was anxious, eager to offload the non-performing debt and recoup his initial investment. The negotiation was swift and devoid of sentiment. I offered to purchase the promissory note at a slight premium, paying him in pristine, untraceable corporate funds. He accepted the terms within the hour. I met his courier in the lobby of a downtown legal firm, signing the transfer documents with a steady hand. The courier handed me a thick folder containing the original contract and the collateral agreement. I sat in my sedan, running my fingers over the embossed paper. Holding that document felt different than discovering a hidden ledger or trapping a hacker. This was tangible power. I now legally owned the debt. I possessed the unilateral authority to initiate foreclosure proceedings on the very house where Martha had starved me exactly 1 year prior. The ground she walked on belonged to me. While I secured my real estate leverage, Nathan was experiencing his own catastrophic collapse. The anonymous dossier I forwarded to the Automotive Plant Compliance Board had ignited a firestorm. Manufacturing executives do not tolerate missing inventory or irregular supply chain payouts. An internal audit team descended upon his facility, seizing hard drives and isolating the accounting servers. The very investigators he had tried to weaponize against me were now dismantling his career. The walls of his deception were shrinking rapidly. The extortionists in his department realized the federal authorities were closing in. They ceased all communication, burning their burner phones and attempting to distance themselves from the embezzlement ring. Nathan was left holding the entire fraudulent apparatus. Facing inevitable arrest and the imminent destruction of his professional identity, his psychological endurance shattered. My encrypted remote server pinged with a priority audio alert. The optical sensors hidden in our living room had detected movement. I slipped on my headphones, adjusting the volume to monitor the live feed. Nathan was pacing the hardwood floor, his tie discarded, his dress shirt stained with nervous perspiration. Martha sat on the couch, looking uncharacteristically fragile. Her country club disgrace and her locked bank accounts had stripped away her arrogant veneer. She clutched a decorative pillow, her eyes following her son as he marched back and forth across the room. The compliance officers locked me out of the system, Nathan shouted, his voice echoing through my headset. They have the offshore routing numbers, Mother. They know about the phantom entity. The Federal Bureau is going to walk into my office and put me in handcuffs before the end of the week. Martha tried to project calm, smoothing the fabric of her skirt with trembling fingers. We will hire a defense attorney, she reasoned, her voice lacking its usual commanding drawl. We will explain that you were coerced. We will say those supply chain managers threatened you. With what money? Nathan fired back, stopping directly in front of her. The judge froze everything. We have nothing left. You bled me dry to cover your own mistakes. You stole from the government 10 years ago and expected me to pay the price when your past caught up with you. I raised you, Martha countered, her tone sharpening defensively. I gave you every advantage. You owe me your loyalty. I owe you nothing! Nathan screamed, the remaining shreds of his familial devotion vaporizing under the threat of a prison sentence. I am not going down for your insurance fraud. When the investigators put me in an interrogation room, I am telling them everything. I will explain that you orchestrated the entire embezzlement scheme. I will testify that you forced me to wire those funds. You are going to take the fall for this. It was your crime. It is your debt. Martha recoiled as if he had struck her across the face. The matriarch who had sacrificed her son marriage and morality to preserve her own legacy was now staring the inevitable consequence of her narcissism right in the eye. Her golden child was eagerly throwing her to the wolves to save his own skin. You would betray your own mother, she whispered, her voice cracking with profound disbelief. You ruined my life, Nathan replied, his tone devoid of empathy. You are going to fix it by pleading guilty. I ended the recording, securing the pristine audio file onto an encrypted flash drive. The betrayal was undeniable. The toxic alliance that had orchestrated my humiliation was now devouring itself from the inside out. They had turned their venom upon one another, fracturing their defense and guaranteeing their mutual destruction. The calendar on my wall indicated December was rapidly approaching. The anniversary of the empty plate loomed on the horizon. I knew Martha well enough to understand her pathology. Despite facing federal indictments, internal audits, and a total financial freeze, her ego would not allow her to cancel her annual holiday gathering. She would desperately attempt to project normalcy to her peers, hoping to salvage her ruined reputation through one final grand illusion. She would undoubtedly distribute formal invitations, trying to convince the Huntsville elite that her kingdom was still intact. She would assume she still reigned supreme in her sprawling Georgian estate. She remained entirely oblivious to the fact that a quiet aerospace auditor held the deed to her kingdom locked inside a secure briefcase. The psychological trap was primed. I only needed to wait for her to set the table. December crept into the Tennessee Valley, bringing a bitter, damp chill that stripped the oak trees bare. Exactly 12 months had passed since I sat at that mahogany dining table and stared at an empty porcelain dish. A full year since my mother-in-law decided to declare a social war she was unequipped to fight. The family court injunction had frozen her primary bank accounts. The federal investigators were actively circling her son, pulling records from his automotive plant. Her pristine reputation was fracturing under the weight of whispered rumors and publicly declined credit cards. A rational human being facing imminent federal indictment would retreat into quiet survival mode. They would hire defense attorneys, secure their perimeter, and prepare for the impending storm. But narcissism is a blinding pathology. For Martha Pierce, perception was the only reality that mattered. If she admitted defeat, the illusion of her supremacy would shatter. She needed to project an image of untouchable prosperity to the Huntsville elite. Her annual holiday gathering was the perfect stage for her final theatrical performance. Growing up in a modest farming community near the sandy Gulf Coast, I learned early that authentic resilience is quiet. My parents worked grueling hours managing agricultural logistics. They taught me that true stability requires a solid foundation, not a glossy exterior. I carried that pragmatism into my career, auditing defense supply chains, evaluating companies based on their structural integrity rather than their marketing brochures. Martha possessed the exact opposite philosophy. She believed a fresh coat of expensive paint could stabilize a collapsing building. Through my intercepted digital feeds, I watched her prepare for the event. She could no longer rely on her frozen banking portfolio, so she pawned a hidden collection of heirloom jewelry to fund the catering. She ordered custom holiday invitations on thick ivory cardstock. The text boasted of an opulent feast, an evening of joy and unbroken family tradition. She meticulously curated the guest list, including every influential cousin, aunt, and uncle in the Pierce lineage. She deliberately excluded my name. She instructed Nathan to inform his sister Abigail to spread the word throughout the country club circuit. Abigail eagerly informed the local socialites that the erratic daughter-in-law had been permanently banished from the estate. Martha wanted everyone to know she had successfully excised me from the family tree. The dramatic irony of her maneuver was almost too exquisite to endure. I sat in my home office, sipping black coffee, holding the legally binding promissory note securing her entire property. I read her digital drafts, boasting about her beautiful home. She was inviting the region's most prominent gossips to celebrate her enduring reign inside a fortress she no longer owned. She was rearranging the deck chairs on a sinking ship while I held the only lifeboat. I did not confront her. I did not send angry messages or demand an invitation. A tactical auditor never interrupts an adversary who is willingly walking into a snare. Instead, I designed my own correspondence. I contacted a premium stationery artisan in a neighboring state, ensuring no local vendor could leak my strategy. I selected a heavy, midnight blue paper stock. I utilized a striking gold foil embossing for the typography. The design projected an unyielding, cold authority. I did not frame it as a holiday dinner. The text read, Apex Resolution Holdings cordially invites you to a formal change of ownership celebration. The location specified was Martha Exact, street address in the affluent Huntsville subdivision. The time was set for Christmas evening at 6 o'clock, the precise hour Martha instructed her guests to arrive. I included a customized, secure email address for the responses. I mailed my midnight blue envelopes to the exact same guest list Martha had utilized. The extended family members received her cheerful holiday card on a Tuesday. They received my stark corporate summons on a Thursday. I understood the psychological mechanics of the Southern elite. They are addicted to spectacle. For weeks, they had heard the swirling rumors regarding Nathan's sudden internal audit at the automotive plant, and Martha humiliating credit card rejections. They sensed a profound shift in the regional power dynamics. Receiving a formal notice of ownership change at the prized Pierce estate created an irresistible shockwave of curiosity. Loyalty in high society is remarkably brittle. It rarely stems from genuine affection. It is usually anchored to whoever holds the most leverage. The extended family recognized the undeniable scent of blood in the water. They knew I was the auditor, married to their unraveling golden boy. They realized I was not hiding in the shadows nursing a broken heart. I was planting a flag on their matriarch front lawn. One by one, the electronic confirmations appeared in my secure inbox. Cousins, who had previously ignored me at charity galas, suddenly requested additional +1 accommodations. Aunts, who had snickered at my empty plate a year ago, sent eager replies. Every single invited relative submitted a formal confirmation to my event. They were not coming to eat Martha prime rib. They were coming to witness an execution. Meanwhile, Martha remained entirely isolated within the sprawling Georgian walls. She spent her days pacing the hardwood floors, polishing silver serving trays, and barking desperate orders at the discounted catering staff she had managed to hire. Nathan was no longer living in the house. The mounting pressure of the federal investigation and his own looming arrest had pushed him into a secluded local motel. He was drowning in cheap bourbon, terrified of the impending automotive plant compliance report. He refused to answer his mother's frantic phone calls, abandoning her just as she had taught him to abandon me. Martha interpreted the silence from her extended family as quiet submission to her authority. She assumed they were simply eager to attend her flawless event and enjoy her legendary hospitality. She had no concept of the digital coup I had just orchestrated beneath her nose. I monitored her frantic preparations through the exterior security cameras I had quietly installed on the street perimeter. She was spending her final, untraceable dollars to create a masterpiece of an evening. She arranged towering floral centerpieces and ordered cases of expensive wine. She polished the very same mahogany table where she had attempted to shatter my dignity. She was building a magnificent stage for her own demise. The calendar pages turned steadily toward the 25th of December. The crisp winter air carried a tense electric anticipation. The chessboard was set. The audience had secured their tickets. The adversary had willingly trapped herself inside the arena. I stood in front of my bedroom mirror, examining my reflection. I was no longer the cautious, compliant woman trying to earn a seat at a hostile table. The grueling hours of tracking phantom ledgers, decoding encrypted communications, and outmaneuvering federal sabotage had refined me into a weapon. I selected a tailored charcoal designer coat, prioritizing sharp, clean lines that projected undeniable dominance. I slipped the recorded deed, the ultimate proof of my conquest, into a leather portfolio. The time for silent auditing had concluded. I picked up my keys and walked out into the freezing evening air, ready to collect the debt. The tires of my sedan crushed the fallen magnolia leaves scattered across the circular driveway, breaking the quiet stillness of the Alabama winter night. The evening air carried a biting chill, carrying the faint metallic scent of impending frost. I shifted the transmission into park, turning off the ignition. The engine ticked softly as the metal cooled. I sat behind the leather-wrapped steering wheel for a long moment, watching a private catering crew rush through the side entrance of the sprawling estate. They carried heavy silver chafing dishes and insulated carriers. This was the exact scene I had observed an hour ago, catching our timeline up to the present moment. My tailored charcoal coat felt like custom-forged armor. The heavy wool blend offered a comforting weight against the December cold, projecting crisp, unyielding lines of authority. I stepped out of the vehicle, my heels striking a sharp, deliberate rhythm against the cobblestone walkway. The Georgian estate loomed ahead, its towering brick columns illuminated by subtle landscape lighting. For decades, this structure had served as the physical manifestation of the Pierce family dynasty. It was a fortress of exclusionary wealth, built to intimidate outsiders and enforce compliance. I walked up the broad stone steps, bypassing the heavy brass knocker mounted on the front door. I reached into my pocket and retrieved a freshly cut silver key. The metal slid into the deadbolt mechanism with a satisfying solid click. I turned the cylinder and pushed the heavy mahogany portal open. The grand foyer smelled of fresh pine needles and expensive beeswax candles. I crossed the threshold, leaving the freezing night behind. The ambient noise of a large gathering drifted down the main hallway. The extended relatives had arrived exactly on time, honoring the midnight blue invitations I had distributed earlier that month. I navigated the familiar corridor, moving with a quiet, unhurried grace. I did not sneak into the residence like an unwelcome guest. I commanded the space. I rounded the final corner and stepped into the formal dining room. The visual impact of my arrival caused an immediate ripple of hushed gasps. 50 members of the local elite occupied the perimeter of the room, clutching crystal wine glasses and porcelain appetizer plates. They formed a silent, captive audience, their eyes darting rapidly between me and the woman standing near the roaring fireplace. Martha wore an emerald silk gown, her hair coiffed into a rigid helmet of blonde perfection. She was in the middle of holding court, gesturing with a silver serving spoon, regaling her cousins with fabricated tales of her enduring prosperity. When she saw me standing in the arched doorway, the color instantly drained from her powdered cheeks. Her pristine social mask fractured, revealing the feral panic churning beneath the surface. Nathan occupied a dark corner near the towering Christmas tree. My husband was barely recognizable from the arrogant executive who had tried to destroy my career with a fake corporate tip. His tailored suit hung loosely over his shrinking frame. Dark hollows shadowed his eyes, reflecting weeks of sleepless terror. The internal compliance audit at his automotive plant had clearly hollowed him out, stripping away his unearned bravado. He clutched a tumbler of amber liquid, staring blankly at the floorboards, a broken man, waiting for the federal authorities to end his misery. He did not even flinch when I entered the room. Martha dropped her serving spoon. The utensil clattered loudly against the stone hearth, echoing through the sudden silence. She marched toward me, her heels stabbing the antique Persian rug with frantic energy. "How did you get inside this house?" Martha demanded, her voice shrill and trembling with unchecked indignation. "You are trespassing, Vivian. I will have you arrested right now." I did not stop walking. I bypassed her, advancing directly toward the head of the long dining table. Growing up, my father managed logistics for a sprawling commercial fishery on the sandy Gulf Coast. He spent his days negotiating with ruthless distributors and navigating treacherous offshore weather systems. He taught me that yielding physical territory during a dispute automatically signals submission. When you hold the leverage, you occupy the center of the room. You force the adversary to orbit your position. I reached the head of the table, resting my gloved hands on the carved wooden chair that Martha typically reserved for herself. The polished mahogany surface gleamed under the crystal chandelier. An oversized digital television mounted on the far wall looped a crackling Yule log, casting a warm, deceptive glow across the tension-filled space. Martha followed me, her face flushing a deep, mottled purple. "Did you hear me?" she shouted, losing all semblance of her polished southern charm. "Get out of my home before I call the precinct commander! He is a personal friend of mine, and he will drag you out of here in handcuffs." I opened my leather portfolio. I withdrew a thick stack of documents bound by a heavy brass clip. The top page featured the embossed seal of the Madison County Clerk Office, validating its legal supremacy. "You cannot trespass on your own property," I stated, my voice calm, steady, and carrying to every corner of the silent room. I placed the documents onto the table, rotating them so the dense legal text faced her directly. "This estate no longer belongs to you, Martha," I explained, maintaining unbroken eye contact. "When you defaulted on the predatory loan you used to fund your extortion payments, the private lender initiated immediate seizure protocols. I purchased the promissory note through a corporate holding company. I executed the foreclosure clause yesterday morning. I hold the recorded deed." I tapped my index finger against the official county seal, ensuring she processed the finality of the action. "The brick walls surrounding us, the antique furniture occupying this room, and the very chair you are attempting to defend now belong solely to me," I announced. "You are a guest in my house." Martha stared at the paperwork, her mind struggling to process the ruinous reality. Her eyes darted from the county seal to my face. The illusion of her supremacy was vaporizing in front of her peers. She operated under the delusion that her social standing insulated her from consequences. She believed her legacy was untouchable. That is a lie. She shrieked, her hand darting forward like a striking viper. She swung her arm, attempting to slap the legal documents off the table. She wanted to physically scatter the truth across the floorboards. I anticipated the desperate strike. I shifted my weight, leaning back a fraction of an inch, allowing her manicured hand to swipe empty air. Her momentum carried her forward, causing her to stumble awkwardly against the edge of the mahogany table. I picked up the deed, securing it back inside my portfolio with methodical care. "Physical tantrums will not alter the county registry," I noted, my tone devoid of pity. The extended family watched the exchange in stunned silence. Aunts and cousins who had happily ignored my existence a year prior now stared at me with wide-eyed apprehension. They witnessed the undeniable transfer of power. The matriarch who had dictated their social hierarchy for decades had just been formally dethroned. Her wealth was a mirage, and her fortress had been conquered without a single shattered window or raised voice. Nathan remained glued to his corner, taking a long, desperate swallow from his glass. He understood the legal mechanics of distressed debt. He knew I had executed a flawless financial checkmate. His mother was now a squatter in a mansion she could not afford. Martha leaned against the table, gasping for breath. The emerald silk gown suddenly looked like a tragic costume on a woman who had lost her kingdom. She looked toward her relatives, searching for an ally, seeking someone to defend her honor. Not a single person moved to comfort her. They had received my invitations. They knew who held the leverage. They were simply waiting to see how the new owner intended to govern the territory. The air in the room grew thick with anticipation. I had successfully seized the estate and eradicated her authority. But securing the perimeter was only the first phase of the operation. The audience was gathered, and the stage was perfectly set. It was time to expose the dark foundational rot that had funded her lavish lifestyle for the past 10 years. The financial eviction was complete. The psychological demolition was about to commence. I remained anchored at the head of the mahogany table, letting the heavy silence stretch across the dining room. Martha clutched the edge of a chair, her knuckles white, her emerald gown rustling as she trembled. She had spent the last 2 weeks hiring discounted staff with whatever cash she could scrape from pawn jewelry. The result sat sparsely on silver platters, a dry roast, a few wilted salads, and a transparent attempt to maintain a facade of generational wealth. I did not need to raise my voice to initiate the transition. I simply lifted my right hand, signaling the grand foyer. Immediately, a line of uniformed catering staff filed into the room. I had contracted a premium culinary team from Birmingham, sparing no expense. They wore crisp black attire and moved with synchronized military precision. They bypassed Martha entirely, treating her as if she were a ghost haunting my property. The staff began clearing away her meager offerings. They swept the dry roast into waste bins and removed her tarnished silverware. Martha let out a strangled gasp, reaching for a platter, but a tall waiter gently intercepted her hand, moving the dish out of her reach. In their place, the team laid down an opulent spread. They set down roasted quail, glazed root vegetables, imported cheeses, and a centerpiece of towering artisan breads. The scent of rosemary and rich marrow filled the air, erasing the stale smell of Martha in her frantic preparations. The dining table, once a battlefield where I was starved and humiliated, transformed, before their eyes, into a monument of my unyielding control. I provided the feast. I owned the arena. The extended relatives watched this display of logistical dominance with wide eyes. My father always told me that loyalty in the South was tied to hospitality. Whoever controls the bread controls the room. The aunts and cousins who had eagerly consumed, whispered rumors about my alleged financial instability, now stared at a spread that cost more than their vehicles. They realized they had backed the wrong faction. From the dark corner near the Christmas tree, a shadow detached itself. Nathan stepped into the ambient light. For months, my husband had hidden behind his mother, allowing her to orchestrate the smear campaigns and the forged loan documents. He had sneaked hackers into our marital home under the cover of darkness. Now, facing a room full of staring relatives and a wife who held the deed to his sanctuary, he attempted a desperate reclamation of his shattered dignity. He straightened his wrinkled suit jacket and marched toward the head of the table. He stopped 3 feet away, projecting a hollow chest, puffing arrogance that reeked of cheap bourbon. "Vivian, this has gone far enough," Nathan declared, his voice cracking slightly on the final syllable. "You bought a piece of paper from a shady lender. That does not give you the right to walk in here and humiliate my family on a holiday. You need to pack up your little catering crew and leave. We can discuss a divorce settlement tomorrow with our lawyers." In the aerospace sector, we classify this behavior as a terminal flail. When a corrupt executive realizes the audit trail leads directly to his desk, he resorts to authoritative posturing. He hopes volume and bluster will blind the investigator to the glaring data anomalies. I did not argue with his delusion. Arguing implies a negotiation, and I had not come to negotiate. I reached into the pocket of my charcoal coat. My fingers brushed against a small, sleek, digital remote. I had synchronized the device to the estate network hours before my arrival, utilizing the master administrative access codes I secured along with the property transfer. I withdrew the remote and pointed it directly at the far wall. Since my entry, the oversized smart television had been looping a digital Yule log. The artificial flames flickered, casting a warm orange glow over the antique credenza. It was the same screen that had illuminated the room a year ago, when I sat staring at an empty porcelain plate. I pressed the central playback button. The crackling fire vanished instantly. The screen plunged into pitch black. A second later, a pristine audio file began broadcasting through the integrated surround sound speakers. The acoustics of the grand dining room amplified the voices, forcing every relative to hear the precise articulation of betrayal. The compliance officers locked me out of the system. Nathan and his recorded voice echoed through the room, laced with panic and sweat. They have the offshore routing numbers, Mother. They know about the phantom entity. The relatives froze. A cousin near the window dropped a crystal goblet. It shattered against the Persian rug, but nobody looked down. Every eye remained glued to the blank screen. I watched Nathan and his face drain of blood. His jaw went slack. He recognized his own panicked confession recorded just days prior in his mother and her living room. "We will hire a defense attorney," Martha and her recorded voice reasoned, sounding frantic. "We will say those supply chain managers threatened you." "With what money?" the broadcasted Nathan screamed. "You bled me dry to cover your own mistakes. You stole from the government 10 years ago and expected me to pay the price when your past caught up with you." The collective gasp from the extended family sucked the oxygen from the room. The esteemed matriarch, the woman who had judged their etiquette and policed their social standing for decades, was publicly exposed as a federal fraudster. The illusion of her old money lineage dissolved, revealing a desperate thief who funded her country club lifestyle with stolen agricultural payouts. But the recording had not reached its lethal apex. "I am not going down for your insurance fraud," the audio continued, Nathan and his voice echoing with ruthless self-preservation. "When the investigators put me in an interrogation room, I am telling them everything. I will explain that you orchestrated the entire embezzlement scheme. You are going to take the fall for this." The audio feed clicked off. The silence that followed was suffocating. Martha slowly turned her head, staring at her son. Her chest heaved beneath the emerald silk. She had sacrificed every shred of her morality to protect her golden child, and the entire family had just listened to him eagerly throw her into the incinerator. Before anyone could speak, the television screen illuminated again. The display shifted from pitch black to the crisp grayscale of a high-definition night vision camera. The footage showed the interior hallway of my Foothill property. The timestamp in the corner read 2 a.m. The relatives watched as Nathan slinked through the shadows, leading a hooded figure carrying a heavy pelican case. They watched my husband unlock the door to my home office, granting access to a corporate mercenary. They witnessed the stranger boot up decryption hardware, attempting to breach my Federal Aerospace laptop. The visual evidence laid bare the true extent of his criminality. He was not merely a distressed manager scrambling to cover a shortfall. He was a domestic saboteur, willing to compromise federal defense data to erase his tracks. The video paused on a crystal-clear freeze frame of the hacker and his terrified face illuminated by the blinding trap I had triggered. I lowered the remote, placing it gently onto the mahogany surface. I turned my gaze toward the 50 relatives lining the walls. The aunts who had shunned me at the charity gala now looked at Nathan with unfiltered revulsion. The cousins who had eagerly spread Martha and her whisper campaigns about my alleged credit card debt stared at the disgraced matriarch with profound contempt. The social hierarchy had not just shifted. It had been obliterated by undeniable, documented truth. Nathan backed away from the television, shaking his head in a futile attempt to deny the digital reality. He bumped into a serving cart, sending a stack of side plates crashing to the floor. Nobody rushed to assist him. He was a pariah in a room full of people who shared his last name. The catering staff finished their silent, efficient work. The opulent feast was fully arranged. Plumes of steam rose from the roasted meats, filling the tense air with the scent of an impending celebration. I stood at the head of my table, surveying the captive audience and the ruined adversaries. The execution was nearly flawless, but the final act required a specific, intimate precision. I locked eyes with Martha, watching her tremble near the doorway, and I prepared to serve the main course. The private catering team completed their synchronized choreography around the massive mahogany table. They placed the final silver cloches over the centerpieces, capturing the heat of the roasted quail and glazed root vegetables. A distinct aroma of rosemary, sage, and rich butter permeated the grand dining room, overriding the stale, lingering scent of desperation that previously occupied the space. Every single member of the extended Pierce family had a full, steaming porcelain plate resting securely in front of them. The crystal water goblets caught the ambient light from the overhead chandelier, casting fractured rainbows across the pristine white linen cloth. I stood at the head of the long table, surveying the captive audience. The relatives who had spent the past 12 months whispering vicious rumors about my financial instability now sat quietly, obediently, waiting for my instruction. They clutched their heavy silverware, avoiding direct eye contact with me, but eagerly eyeing the opulent feast I had provided. In the aerospace auditing sector, we often discuss the concept of shifting gravity. When a massive structural component is removed from a delicate framework, the entire system must rapidly adjust to find a new center of balance or face total, catastrophic collapse. The Pierce family hierarchy had just undergone a violent gravitational shift. I was the new center. My gaze drifted past the seated cousins and silent aunts, traveling the length of the beautiful room, until it locked on to my former mother-in-law. Martha stood paralyzed near the arched doorway, her emerald silk gown trembling as she breathed in shallow, frantic gasps. The vibrant color of her expensive dress clashed horribly with the ashen gray pallor of her complexion. The undeniable broadcast of her criminal extortion scheme had stripped away every layer of her carefully constructed country club veneer. She was no longer a feared Huntsville socialite, commanding respect and obedience. She was a publicly exposed fraud, drowning in the wreckage of her own arrogance. Nathan remained utterly incapacitated, hunched against the far wall near the towering Christmas tree. My husband had completely checked out of the confrontation, retreating into a shell of absolute cowardice. He cradled his empty bourbon glass, his eyes darting toward the front windows, searching for an escape route that no longer existed. He offered no defense for his mother, no apologies to his relatives, and no challenge to my authority. The alliance between mother and son had disintegrated into toxic ash. I placed my hands flat against the polished wood of the table, anchoring myself in the moment. The silence stretched thick and heavy across the dining room, broken only by the soft crackle of the digital fireplace playing on the television screen. "Dinner is served," I announced, my voice carrying the cold, smooth cadence of absolute victory. The instruction broke the spell paralyzing the room. The relatives began to unfold their napkins and reach for their water glasses, moving with hesitant, cautious gratitude. They understood the implicit contract of the evening. Consuming the food I provided meant acknowledging my supreme ownership of the estate and accepting the permanent dethronement of their former matriarch. Martha watched her family abandon her with hungry eagerness. Her eyes widened with disbelief as her own sister picked up a silver fork and sliced into the roasted meat, entirely ignoring the devastated woman standing just a few yards away. The sheer weight of the rejection triggered a primal, desperate instinct within Martha. Her narcissism could not comprehend the reality of her total isolation. She operated under the delusional assumption that her bloodline would still afford her a designated place within the hierarchy. She stepped forward, her heels clicking unsteadily against the hardwood floor. She moved toward the right side of the long table, instinctively reaching for an empty, high-backed chair situated between two of her nephews. She intended to sit down to join the feast, to pretend that the broadcasted evidence of her federal felonies was merely a crude misunderstanding that could be smoothed over with polite dinner conversation. I lifted my right hand, keeping my palm facing outward, a universal gesture of immediate cessation. Martha stopped dead in her tracks, her fingers hovering mere inches above the carved wooden backing of the chair. She looked up at me, her expression twisting into a mixture of lingering entitlement and dawning terror. My mind flashed back to my early childhood on the sandy Gulf Coast, watching my father negotiate contracts with ruthless commercial fishermen. He taught me that true power is never demonstrated through shouting. True power is the ability to whisper and command the attention of an entire room. It is the capacity to dismantle an adversary using their exact weapons, turning their past cruelty into the instrument of their present destruction. I offered Martha a thin, surgically precise smile. I let the silence hang for 3 long seconds, ensuring every single person at the table was listening closely to the impending exchange. "Oh, bless your heart, Martha," I stated, perfectly mimicking the sweet, calculated Southern drawl she had wielded against me exactly 1 year prior. "There just isn't a seat for you. You don't mind, do you?" The devastating callback hit the older woman like a physical, kinetic blow. She physically recoiled, stumbling backward a half step as the memory of her own malicious behavior crashed down upon her. The aunts and uncles exchanged wide-eyed glances, instantly recognizing the poetic justice unfolding before them. They remembered the empty plate. They remembered the starvation tactic. They were witnessing the karmic debt being collected with brutal, uncompromising accuracy. Martha opened her mouth, her jaw trembling, but her vocal cords refused to produce a sound. The humiliation was absolute, encompassing, and entirely suffocating. I reached into the deep pocket of my tailored charcoal coat. I did not retrieve another legal document or a digital remote. I pulled out a cheap, flimsy plastic to-go container. Earlier that afternoon, I had visited a local discount cafeteria, purchasing a single, inexpensive meal specifically for this precise interaction. I walked around the edge of the mahogany table, closing the distance between us. I stopped directly in front of the disgraced matriarch, invading her personal space, projecting an aura of unyielding dominance. I extended my arm, pressing the cheap plastic container firmly against her chest, forcing her to reflexively grasp the thin plastic material to prevent it from dropping. Through the transparent lid, Martha could clearly see the contents. It held a single meager slice of tough, overcooked prime rib and a small, pathetic scoop of cold, instant potatoes. It was the exact meal she had proudly denied me when she thought she held all the leverage in the world. I leaned in incredibly close, ensuring my words were meant exclusively for her ears, while the rest of the room watched the exchange in breathless suspense. "You can eat this in the police cruiser," I whispered, my tone frigid and merciless. Martha gasped, dropping the plastic container onto the floor. The thin lid popped open, scattering the cold potatoes across the expensive Persian rug. Her eyes dilated with sheer, unadulterated panic as the true meaning of my whispered promise penetrated her collapsing psyche. She spun around wildly, looking toward the heavy mahogany front doors of the estate. Before she could formulate a scream, the heavy, serene silence of the crisp Alabama night was violently shattered. The piercing wail of approaching sirens echoed through the dark winter air, growing rapidly louder. Through the large bay windows illuminating the grand foyer, sharp flashes of aggressive red and blue emergency lights began to pulse against the frosted glass. Heavy tires screeched to a halt on the cobblestone driveway outside, signaling the arrival of a massive, coordinated federal task force. The final trap had officially sprung shut. The pulsating emergency lights painted the frosted glass of the front entryway with rhythmic strokes of crimson and sapphire. The heavy bass of approaching engines rattled the antique window panes, sending a low vibration through the floorboards. Inside the dining room, nobody dared to breathe. The extended relatives remained frozen in their chairs, their forks hovering over roasted quail and buttered root vegetables. The spectacle of the flashing lights confirmed the catastrophic reality I had just orchestrated. I stood perfectly still, watching Martha attempting to process the sensory overload. Her gaze darted from the spilled cold potatoes on the Persian rug to the strobe effect illuminating the foyer. She took a staggering step backward, her emerald silk gown swishing against the hard wood. She looked toward her son, seeking some final shred of salvation. Nathan had already surrendered to his fate. He slid down the wall near the towering Christmas tree, pulling his knees toward his chest. His tailored suit wrinkled around his defeated frame. He stared blankly at the floor, waiting for the inevitable consequences of his prolonged financial deception. He looked small, insignificant, stripped of the unearned arrogance that had defined his entire existence. The heavy brass handle of the front door turned. I had not locked it upon my arrival. I had also emailed a comprehensive digital consent form to the regional field office, granting federal authorities unrestricted access to the premises I now legally owned. They did not require a battering ram or a prolonged standoff. They simply walked inside. Heavy, tactical boots thudded against the marble tiles of the entryway. A dozen agents wearing dark windbreakers bearing the bold yellow letters of the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Securities and Exchange Commission poured into the residence. They moved with coordinated clinical precision, securing the perimeter and fanning out across the first floor. A tall lead agent stepped into the arched doorway of the dining room. He possessed a stern, weathered face and scanned the silent crowd with analyzing eyes. He held a thick stack of warrants secured on a metal clipboard. He did not ask for permission to speak. "Nathan Pierce," he announced, his voice cutting through the ambient hum of the digital fireplace. "Step forward." My former husband did not protest. He lacked the energy to construct another lie. He slowly pushed himself off the wall, his legs trembling beneath his weight. He shuffled toward the center of the room, keeping his head bowed, avoiding the piercing stares of his aunts and cousins. 2 agents flanked him instantly. One grabbed his right wrist, twisting it behind his back with practiced efficiency. The sharp, metallic ratcheting of steel handcuffs echoed through the silent space, locking him into his new reality. "You are under arrest," the agent recited, delivering the Miranda warning alongside a devastating list of charges. "Conspiracy to commit wire fraud, corporate embezzlement, extortion." Nathan offered no resistance as they guided him toward the exit. He did not look back at his mother, or the lavish feast he would never consume. He simply disappeared into the corridor, a hollow shell of a man heading toward a concrete cell. The lead agent turned his attention back to the room. His eyes locked onto the trembling woman in the emerald gown. "Martha Pierce," he stated, walking purposefully toward her. The matriarch finally found her voice. It emerged as a frantic, high-pitched squeak, devoid of her signature Southern drawl. "This is a misunderstanding," she pleaded, backing away until her shoulders hit the edge of a mahogany credenza. "I am a respected member of this community. You cannot do this. I know the precinct commander. I host the charity galas." "Federal warrants supersede country club memberships," the agent replied, his tone barren of any sympathy. He gestured to a female officer who stepped forward and firmly grasped Martha by the arm. The older woman flinched, pulling away in a futile display of resistance. She turned her desperate gaze toward the long dining table, searching the faces of her extended family. She sought an ally, an advocate, anyone willing to stand up and defend her honor. "Please," she begged, her voice cracking into a sob. "Tell them who I am. Tell them this is a mistake." The relatives offered nothing but icy silence. Cousins who had eagerly attended her lavish parties now stared down at their plates, refusing to meet her eyes. Aunts who had participated in her whisper campaigns against me now shrank into their chairs, desperate to distance themselves from the radioactive fallout of her crimes. They understood the power dynamics had permanently shifted. Defending a fraudster meant inviting the scrutiny of the federal agents currently occupying the room. They chose self-preservation over familial loyalty. Martha realized she was entirely abandoned. The social empire she had sacrificed her morality to build crumbled into dust before her eyes. She was a queen without a kingdom, stripped of her wealth, her influence, and her golden child. The female officer secured her wrists behind her back, the handcuffs snapping shut with grim finality. They marched her toward the grand foyer. As she passed the dining table, she cast one final look in my direction. Her eyes brimmed with tears of profound humiliation. I offered no parting remarks. I simply stood at the head of my table, projecting an unyielding calm, watching the architect of my torment shuffle out the front door. The heavy wooden portal closed behind the agents, muting the sound of the idling transport vehicles. The flashing emergency lights gradually faded as the convoy pulled away from the circular driveway, driving down the dark Alabama roads toward the Federal Processing Center. The dining room settled into a deep, unbroken tranquility. The 50 relatives remained seated, processing the breathtaking execution they had just witnessed. Nobody spoke. Nobody reached for their phones. They waited for my instruction. I walked slowly around the edge of the mahogany table, taking my designated seat at the head. The plush cushioning of the carved wooden chair provided a comforting embrace. I reached for an untouched crystal goblet and a bottle of vintage Cabernet, breathing in the rich, dark notes of the expensive wine. I poured a generous measure, watching the ruby liquid catch the light from the chandelier above. I lifted the glass, signaling the start of the meal. The guests inhaled a collective breath of relief. Silverware clinked against porcelain as they finally began to consume the feast I had provided. The tension dissipated, replaced by the quiet, focused energy of survival and acceptance. They ate the roasted quail and the artisan breads, acknowledging my sovereignty with every bite. I took a slow, deliberate sip of the wine. The complex flavors bloomed across my palate, carrying notes of oak and dark cherry. It tasted like quiet vindication. Revenge is rarely a loud, chaotic spectacle. It does not require screaming matches in front yards or broken glass. True retaliation operates like a meticulously audited ledger. It demands patience, precision, and the quiet gathering of undeniable facts. You observe the anomalies, you trace the fraudulent transactions, and you wait for the adversary to leverage everything they own on a fragile lie. Then you present the receipts, balancing the scales of justice with surgical accuracy. I sat in the beautiful, warm room, listening to the soft murmur of polite conversation and the crackle of the digital fireplace. The house belonged to me. The narrative belonged to me. I had extracted the toxic rot from the foundation and secured my perimeter against any future incursions. The year-long audit was officially closed, and the final balance was perfect. I set my crystal goblet down on the pristine linen cloth, enjoying the exquisite silence of a holiday evening where I was finally and permanently free. The flashing red and blue lights of the federal transport vehicles eventually bled into the cold, pristine Alabama night, leaving behind a silence so profound it felt physical. I sat alone at the head of the mahogany dining table, a half-empty crystal goblet of Cabernet resting between my fingers. The plates were full, the house was mine, and the war was over. Yet as the adrenaline of my meticulously orchestrated survival faded, the cold clarity of the aftermath settled in. The true wreckage of the Pierce family was not found in their seized assets, their foreclosed estates, or their frozen offshore accounts. The tragedy lay in the generational rot that had inevitably collapsed under its own hollow weight. As I stared at the empty chairs surrounding me, my thoughts shifted away from the audit of my revenge and toward the anatomy of the disaster I had just witnessed. How does a family reach a point where a son, so easily, so callously, throws his own mother to federal agents to save his own skin? How does a mother become so blinded by the illusion of high society that she actively orchestrates the destruction of her own child's moral compass? The answer, I realized, is rooted not in finance, but in the profound failures of parenting. It is a cautionary tale about what happens when we abandon the core pillars of honesty, fairness, and emotional accountability in the pursuit of superficial prestige. In modern American culture, particularly within the traditional family structures that pride themselves on legacy reputation and the keeping up of appearances, there is a dangerous misconception about what it means to protect our children. From the Appalachian foothills to the sandy Gulf Coast, we celebrate the ideal of the fiercely loyal family unit. Martha Pierce operated under the delusion that shielding Nathan from the consequences of his actions was the ultimate expression of maternal devotion. She believed that by utilizing her wealth and social standing to erase his mistakes, she was building an impenetrable fortress around him. But a fortress built on deception is merely a prison waiting for a warden. When we raise children, our primary responsibility is not to pave a frictionless road for them to walk upon. True guidance requires teaching a child how to navigate the inevitable potholes, storms, and failures that life will present. By continually bailing Nathan out of his financial shortfalls, by covering up his corporate extortion, and by encouraging him to gaslight his own wife, Martha, did not save her son. She crippled him. She raised a man who lacked the fundamental emotional awareness required to process failure or take accountability for his own actions. When children are denied the opportunity to fail, they are denied the opportunity to grow. They never develop the resilience necessary to admit fault, to apologize, or to correct their course. Instead, they learn that the truth is a malleable commodity, that accountability is a punishment reserved for the lower classes, and that a pristine public image can seamlessly substitute for a functioning moral compass. Consider the inciting incident of this entire saga, the empty plate at Christmas dinner. On the surface, it was a petty, vindictive slight, designed to remind me of my place. But beneath the surface, it was a masterclass in the absence of emotional awareness and fairness. Martha's inability to treat a daughter-in-law with basic dignity was a learned behavior, one she undoubtedly modeled for Nathan his entire life. Fairness in a family structure does not mean an equal distribution of wealth. It means an equal distribution of respect. When a family prioritizes bloodline superiority and status over basic human decency, it breeds a toxic narcissism that eventually consumes itself. Nathan's silence at that table, his refusal to defend his wife against his mother's calculated cruelty, was the direct result of a lifetime spent avoiding uncomfortable truths. If we wish to raise children who become functional, contributing adults in American society, we must instill emotional awareness from the ground up. This means teaching them to sit with the severe discomfort of their own wrongdoings. It means forcing them to look at the empty plate they have handed someone else and recognizing the pain they have caused. Nathan was incapable of this, because he was raised in an environment where empathy was viewed as a liability and dominance was the only currency that mattered. There is a powerful undercurrent in American culture that celebrates the passing down of empires. We strive to leave our children better off than we were, to hand them the keys to a kingdom we worked our entire lives to build. But we too often confuse financial inheritance with moral inheritance. What good is a sprawling Georgian estate if the man inheriting it is a hollow shell terrified of his own shadow? What value does a country club membership hold if it is funded by extortion, forged signatures, and deceit? The greatest legacy a parent can leave a child is not a balanced trust fund, but a balanced character. We have a profound responsibility to guide our children toward integrity, even when it costs them social standing or short-term financial gain. Honesty must be non-negotiable. When a child learns that their parents will tolerate a lie to protect a reputation, the foundation of the family is permanently compromised. As I watched Nathan being escorted out in handcuffs, his final act of defiance was to blame the very woman who had sacrificed her soul to protect him. This was the ultimate tragic harvest of Martha's parenting. She had raised a coward, and in her moment of greatest need, that cowardice was turned directly upon her. If you have ever found yourself questioning the boundaries of family loyalty, navigating the treacherous waters of toxic in-laws, or wrestling with the immense weight of raising children in a culture that often values success over character, you are not alone. The stories we share are the mirrors in which we examine our own lives, our own choices, and our own legacies. I encourage you to follow Emily Told Stories for more narratives that dive deep into the complexities of family dynamics, the pursuit of justice, and the quiet, unyielding power of undeniable truth. We must continue to share these experiences so we can learn to build tables where everyone is afforded a seat. As the digital Yule log flickered on the screen in that empty, beautiful dining room, I poured myself a final measure of Cabernet and reflected on the strange, cyclical nature of justice and family duty. We are often told by conventional wisdom that a parent's ultimate unwavering duty is to protect their child from the harshness of the world at all costs. We are conditioned to believe that love is synonymous with shielding, that true devotion requires standing between our children and the fires they have recklessly set. We spend our lives patting the sharp corners of society so our offspring never have to feel the sting of a bruise. But perhaps the exact opposite is true. Perhaps a love that shields a child from the truth isn't love at all. It is sabotage disguised as devotion. Our truest, most profound duty as parents is not to protect our children from the world. Our duty is to protect the world from our children until they have developed the grace, the honesty, and the emotional fortitude to inherit it properly. Look around your own dining table tonight. When the plates are cleared and the polite conversations fade into the quiet hours of the evening, what are you truly serving the people you claim to love? Are you feeding them the hard, nourishing truths that will sustain them in a storm? Or are you handing them an empty plate, polished to a high shine, hoping they never realize they are slowly starving to death?